are so grateful for you to be with us. So just a few housekeeping items for those who are in person, and thank you to all of you who are attending virtually. We do have just an announcement for CME. Apologies here. Are they able to hear me through web? Okay. All right. This activity is approved through the AMA, and for this session today, you will receive 6.25 CEs. And so for those who are physicians, you should claim only the credit to the extent of your participation in the activity. For those who are non-physicians, these are usually accepted through the venue of your professional organization. So registered nurses, the ANCC does accept the credit. Nurse practitioners, the AANP likewise as well. All right, so we definitely want your involvement and your questions, and we have technology to help us do so. Obviously, for those who are virtual, you will be able to use the team site in order to connect and ask your questions. We have a team that are monitoring them and will be responsive. For those who have joining us in person, which is very exciting considering the last 2 years we haven't been able to meet in a conference venue here at Swedish, we do have QR codes right attached to every one of our seats. Please scan the QR code. There's instructions. You have to mute and silence your phone just for your awareness. And then you can use the little icon for questions to type in what you might have inquiries on. And we definitely would like you to promote and share your experience at this event. We've got a selfie station that's out in the corridor. In addition, there's a QR code at the desk up front where you can then scan and upload your photos and share so that we can ensure that our community knows of the great work and the experience that we've had today. So with that, we have a fairly extensive agenda. We have an opening session where we have a guest speaker, Dr. Kelly Polson, who has joined us today. We do have 4 podium presenters who will be sharing their important work from the last year and a half, which we're thrilled to be able to provide. We do have a built-in lunch break, and so for those who are virtual, just make sure that you come back at 11:10, where we will talk about quality and process improvement. And then after lunch, we'll have our poster walk and networking. For those who are in person, you'll have the opportunity to check out the posters. And for those who are virtually, likewise through our virtual platform. All right, with that, we'd like to do an opening video just to share some of our experiences of this last year.
If I were to think of one word
to describe the past year,
the word is
difficult.
Turbulent. Just adjusting to the changing world that we live in.
Learning. It was a little strange because everyone would say, oh, before COVID, we would do it this way. But for me as a student, everything is just how it is. This is my normal.
Versatility. Probably the word that we've used a lot this year is pivot. Keeping everybody healthy and just transitioning from one action plan to the next.
Strong.
Perseverance. I saw our teams persevere under the most extreme circumstances.
Dedication, dedicated to the communities that we serve, for our patients to have always the best outcome possible.
So to describe the past year, I would pick the word community. Healthcare left the building and we went to the streets of Seattle to meet people in testing centers and in vaccine delivery centers. At Lumen Field, we formed bridges so that we could meet our patients where they need us to be.
The year ahead.
If I were to use one word to describe the coming year, I would say it was optimism.
Creativity.
Promising.
Promise of being able to connect with other individuals, hug our loved ones.
Stronger.
Improvement.
Limitless. The sky's the limit with Swedish and the staff that we have working. I think us pulling together, we can do anything. Anything is achievable.
I think next year, the word that comes to mind for me is hope.
Hopeful.
Hope from the chaotic times on 2020 feels like I am trapped in a long, dark tunnel that I feel like I should find the light anytime soon, which didn't come. The team was suffered a lot, not real physically, I wouldn't say, but emotionally and mentally. And it will be definitely a bounce back year for our caregivers at Swedish. And I'm hoping for that.
I hope you enjoyed that video. It definitely was quite inspiring to hear the voices of our leaders and caregivers. And I would say this opportunity to come together in this hybrid format to talk about all that we can celebrate in relation to our research and quality improvement projects over the last year gives me hope, and looking forward to 2022 and 2023. So with that, I have the opportunity of introducing Dr. Guy Hudson. Dr. Hudson is our first president of operations and strategy for the Puget Sound region of Providence, and a position that he's held since September of 2021, when the region was first created. Dr. Hudson also serves as chief executive officer of Providence Swedish. He oversees the coordination of Providence affiliated entities in Western Washington, including 8 acute care hospitals, 2 freestanding emergency departments, and hundreds of ambulatory and specialty clinics, to ensure that all affiliated entities are positioned to meet the evolving healthcare model and needs of our community. So welcome, Dr. Guy Hudson.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to see everybody today in person, but also looking at all of you virtually. Thanks for joining us today for the 2nd annual Learning and Celebration Day for Swedish. I think when you hear what comes to mind, it's exactly what comes to mind with what we heard on the video, which is hope. But also what you're going to hear over the next 2-day session is what is always grounded Swedish in our communities, with Swedish being first in innovation, Swedish driving the things in quality and patient safety for healthcare and providing the best care for all, and then really leading the way in how we take care of each other, and most importantly, how we take care of our communities. So for the next 2 days, you're going to see a lot of innovation. You're going to be a part of a lot of discussions. You're going to see a lot of posters. You're going to see the things that we're doing that COVID did not slow us down on. And what I would say right now, the national healthcare landscape is restless. I was out in Washington, D.C. I got back last night because we needed to talk to the senators of Washington and talk to them about what's happening in our state and what we're seeing on the ground, what all of you are seeing and feeling as we come out of COVID, yet COVID's not gone. It's not 2019 anymore. We compare ourselves to 2019, but what we're going to see in healthcare is we're going to reset a baseline. That baseline is not going to be 2019. It's going to be a new baseline with how we're going to take everything that we learned during the pandemic, apply it to what we're doing now, and continue to move Swedish forward. And you're going to hear a lot of the things that we're focused on over the next couple days. All of you have led the way. You've seen in the video, whether it's with being one of the first in the nation to see COVID. Our colleagues up in Everett were the first. We were a week behind, but yet if you think about the COVID pandemic, and I know it's almost becoming a bad word, you know, we've been running that marathon the longest out of anybody in the country. And we've had people step up in ways, whether it's some of the research around that, whether it's innovative treatments, but you know what? All of you here, all of you virtually, you've saved lives. And you've helped each other get through very trying times. And for that, you have my thanks. So as we emerge and as we keep moving, as COVID is part of our lives, as it will be, The things that we need to continue to focus on are the things that we focus on what you're going to hear with the Learning and Celebration Days. So the one thing that, at least that I've learned over the course of time, is it's hard to stand by yourself and get things done. It takes teams. All of us function as a team at Swedish, 12,000 caregivers. If you look at the Puget Sound, we're 22,000 strong, and we are the health system in the state of Washington. We were the public health system throughout the pandemic. We served everybody, regardless of their ability to pay, 24/7 for the last several years when they came to see us when they were sick. So not only do we treat them when they're sick, but we want to keep them healthy. You're going to hear some of the things that we're doing to keep people healthy, but as the health system shifts, making sure that we do not waver on quality and patient safety going forward, because the world is evolving quickly, especially in healthcare, with the unique advent of innovation. Just look at telehealth visits. Before telehealth was just kind of an emerging technology, we used it in some areas of our health system. We were one of the first to do telestroke across the region, but all of a sudden we were using it for almost every type of interconnectivity to stay connected with our patients when they were afraid to leave their homes. We scaled that quickly because we had already had the technology in place. We moved it faster. COVID has served as a catalyst for us to move things more quickly going forward. And I think, again, you're going to hear that today. But I think one of the things, at least one of the first things I noticed as I was standing in the back of the room and looking at the slides, you can see the top left-hand corner of the slide, Providence, Swedish. When we're talking about better together and creating the healthcare system of the future, it's really all of us working together to do it. The affiliation with Providence is a decade old as of this past February, a decade. And what I would say is, as we go forth together, we are much better if we actually show that outward face to others and say, hey, you know what? We're here for you. Because Providence Swedish serves a lot of communities, and we can all rally around what we do, centered around our values and our mission to actually provide that care. Non-for-profits in healthcare are really facing a very, very powerful crunch right now. As costs escalate in healthcare, we've seen health supplies as well as pharmaceuticals go up 20 to 36% respectively when you look at just what's coming through the door based on the way the world is. We're all combating inflation, we're all doing things, but the one thing that we're not going to slow down on is innovation. And for those of you that are sitting in Glazer Auditorium, you can look at that right outside our back door when we continue to build for our future. We got to continue to look forward as we're still moving through the recovery. And so this is why we're better together. This is why we're all doing the things that we need to do to move forward. And I couldn't ask for a better team to do that. I've been at Swedish 15 years. I've been in a lot of different, I'd say, positions as a surgeon that operates on children, all the way up to the chief executive officer role, and then also to what I'm doing today. And I've never been more proud to stand alongside each and every one of you going forward with where we're headed. So we're going to focus on 4 topics today. Renee was walking through those. You know, the Paul G. Allen Research Center at the Swedish Cancer Institute started with an innovative gift from the Paul Allen Foundation for us to do more prevention, diagnosis, treatment, work further upstream, but drive research in cancer care, because that is one area where I would not be ashamed if we put ourselves out of business. If we can cure cancer or help other organizations do that, we are on the right road to saving lives. Dr. Paulson is going to give us a rundown of the things that we're doing with that bequest, because we are going to drive that together. And so I couldn't be more proud of not only the gift, but also the physicians, caregivers, nurses, and everyone surrounding themselves around that say, hey, what can we do with this that's actually going to make a difference and save lives and drive innovation in cancer care? Dr. Paulson and others will help explain that today, actually. And that section is next. And then we're going to talk a little about quality and patient safety. Quality and patient safety is one of those things that evolves and continues to change and get better over time. It is one of those things where we learn from each other, whether you're at Ballard or Edmonds or Issaquah, Cherry Hill or First Hill, or in one of our clinics. Patient safety is a shared endeavor. Patient safety is where we learn from one another and we talk about our experiences to share those amongst ourselves and drive quality improvement. People come to us during the most vulnerable times of their lives but they want to be in a safe environment to get care. We provide that. Some of our hospitals have been designated the safest in the state. That's because of you. We're proud of that. And we will continue to do that. And we will continue to drive that care, that change, that structure, and that innovation. Tomorrow, we're going to move into some of the behavior and wellness sections where all of us have faced trying times, I think, going through the pandemic, not only personally, but also family. I got a call from my daughter who's at university at in the Northwest, and she said, "Dad, I need to talk to someone." She's a freshman and she's finishing up that year, and she says, "Dad, I need to talk to someone." We all need that sometimes. Our caregivers need that sometimes. You need that sometimes. Our families need that. We all do. Our health and wellness going forward and what we've seen, our generation has not seen until the last couple of years. So yes, we talk about resilience. We talk about these things. And you know, being part of healthcare, we're always tough. But you know what? It's okay to say, you know what? I need to take a break. I need a second. I need to ask for help. We're going to talk about these things because really us standing beside one another and acknowledging the fact that we all need help in the health and wellness space, particularly mental and behavioral health. You have to acknowledge it first, then you get help and we can be on the road to recovery. Every single healthcare worker in the nation is feeling that. This is why we've had 20% of the workforce leave healthcare in the nation. 20%. Some are coming back, some are staying retired, but you know the attrition is going to continue as we work to hire more people into the workforce and bring people into Providence, Swedish, and all of the organizations that we partner with around the Puget Sound. Everybody is looking at how can we do this better? How can we change the way we do things every day? How can we support all of you do your jobs? But we also have to balance it on the other end. How can we help you when you go home? How can we help you re-engage with your family? It's one thing to have stress at work or stress at home, but when you have both of them, when you're dealing with a pandemic and coming out of it and the ramifications from that, that is what can really, really hurt and really, really affect all of us. And most importantly, we're going to end tomorrow with talking about our efforts around diversity, equity, inclusion. That is one of the most important things that we could ever do, is representing our communities, not only with leadership, but also with our efforts to drive an internal culture around diversity and equity inclusion, and then lead the way externally and talking to other organizations with what we've learned to help all around diversity, equity, inclusion. We have a partnership with Meharry Medical College out of Nashville, which is an all-black medical college. If we look at our medical staff, driving diversity in our medical staff and having more diversity in our medical staff be out in the community in some of the areas that we need to serve better. We can drive diversity in our workforce, more physicians, more nurses, more caring. Our board, the Swedish Board of Trustees, was just written up in the American Hospital Association as one of the most diverse boards in healthcare on that journey, and it's taken 5 years, but it was very intentional. Our leadership team, 53% are women, and we have 30+% that are minorities, BIPOC, to represent all of whom we serve. Dr. Kevin Wang, leading the LGBTQIA positive initiatives. My career in surgical care was based on treating those with gender identity issues, as well as those children who are born with conditions where you don't know if they're a boy or a girl. I've been dealing and proudly serving those patients my entire career, and I still talk to them. Dr. Wang, hats off to you, my friend. I really appreciate everything you're doing, you and your team. Dr. Wando Andiaco, Marty Ashans are leading the way, because we have to be very intentional about it. and you have to continue doing things going forward to support. So the 4 things that we're gonna review over the course of the next 2 days are foundational to what we do. We're not slowing down with innovation. People always ask, whether you're in this state around us, what is Swedish doing around innovation, quality of care, and others? State of Washington, if we look at the hospitals around the state of Washington from a rural perspective, COVID has taken its toll. Many are underwater. Part of the hospitals around the country are operating with a negative margin. So let's say that we have some challenges around the state of Washington. Where do you think they're going to go for care? They're going to come here, as they have been. During the Delta wave of COVID, Swedish took the most transfers of anyone in the state because our doors were open all the time to get patients in where they needed it most. They needed to come to us, and they did. We're proud to do that. So 15 years ago, actually my 15-year anniversary is November, if I remember right. So I'll be here 15 years as of this coming November. I came to Swedish because I wanted to work with the best people. I've been in private practice. I've been in a university setting, 2 universities actually, San Diego, as well as Oregon Health and Science University. I came to Swedish because I wanted to work with the best clinicians, the best innovation, the best people, the best nursing care, but really just be grounded in the diversity of who we are, supporting one another, creating a culture that we can all be proud of. But we can't do it without you, and we can't do it without acknowledging who we are and where we're going. And most importantly, the 4 topics that we're going to talk about today, I think, are critical for continuing our road to do all the things that I've mentioned in the past few minutes. So enjoy your time with us. Enjoy the Swedish Learning and Celebrations Day, 2nd annual. That's right, it's coming back next year. And we're going to talk about great things. It's going to be interesting to see how healthcare evolves over the course of the next year or 2. Because right now, I don't think you can put a strategic plan in for 3 to 5 years, because especially the Puget Sound, the next couple years, as we work through our recovery and get back into where we're heading, we will set the standard of where we're going. And others are paying attention to us and asking us questions on how to lead that way. Can't do it without you, so I appreciate everybody being here today and your attention and your time. It's the cornerstone of what we do. And on that note, I appreciate it's an honor to be here and chat with all of you, and most importantly, I'm very proud to work along all of you, alongside each and every one of you, as I have for the last almost 15 years. And on that note, I'd like to introduce Amir, who is going to talk to us about and introduce our next section. So Amir, I'll have you come up and lead the way. Oh, great, thank you. Perfect.
Thank you, Dr. Hudson. Come up so that people on virtual
yeah, come on up.
See us. Thank you, guys.
Cheers. Thanks for being here. Thanks, everybody.
And good morning, everyone. This is really exciting. My role is overseeing
Is the podium mic on now? Perfect. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's wonderful to see everyone in person and virtually. And I'm excited on behalf of my leads of the other pillars, Dr. Hank Kaplan and Dr. Chuck Drescher, to tell you about this newly founded effort within Swedish, which is the Paul G. Allen Research Center. So the Paul G. Allen Research Center was made possible by a generous gift of Paul Allen and his family. It's really fueling a cornerstone gift to help improve the care for our patients with cancer. And Mr. Allen and his family felt that it was very important to address all patients with cancer along the cancer continuum. So first and foremost, helping to prevent cancer. I heard Dr. Hudson talk about putting us out of business. I've got a second career planned as a ski bum. So let's hope to be successful. Cancer detection, to help find that cancer at the earliest stages when we're most likely to cure it, and then treatment to help improve treatment along that cancer continuum from those with early cancers to the most advanced cancers to get the best possible outcomes, and really provide an outstanding environment for doing the types of translational research studies that make these efforts possible. I probably don't need to convince those in the room the impact of cancer, but there are more than 1.7 million invasive cancers diagnosed every year in the United States. More than 35,000 of these will be in Washington State. About 40,000 are predicted in Washington State for 2022. There are more than 600,000 cancer deaths each year. It remains the second leading cause of death in the United States, even in the COVID era. 1 in 4 deaths in the United States are due to cancer. Each year, 1 in 200 people will be diagnosed with a new invasive cancer. The current lifetime risk of developing cancer in the United States is more than 1 in 3. And this means that pretty much everyone in this room is touched by cancer in some way, through a loved one, a friend, a colleague, someone you know has been touched by cancer. We also know that cancer is a continuum. We know that cancer comes from healthy normal cells in our body. They have to replenish themselves to help keep us young, functional, active. And these normal cells that are dividing normally become abnormal. They grow too many, and they grow in the wrong places, and they turn from something that is a benign overgrowth into something that is dangerous. Just like cancer cells are a continuum of going from something that's just a little bit abnormal to something that's life-threatening, cancer research is also a continuum, with the research mimicking the biology and starting from understanding what makes a good cell go bad, all the way to how can we mitigate the effects of cancer on a society. And with the Paul G. Allen Research Center, my colleagues and myself hope to make progress on cancer along this continuum, as I will show you more further along in the talk. We know that research has made a dramatic difference in cancer over the last 20 years. Research has improved cancer prevention. So when we look at the US annual incidence of lung cancer from 1999 to 2018, we've gone down in our lung cancer cases by 25%. This is one of the most common cancers, and these smoking prevention, smoking cessation efforts have made a huge difference in the number of lung cancers that we've diagnosed as a society. We also know that research has resulted in improved cancer detection. This is data from the most recent 5-year interval available in the US cancer statistics, looking at breast cancer diagnoses. With mammogram screening and other public health efforts, we now diagnose 2/3 of breast cancers when they are limited to the breast and at the most curable stage. And finally, we know that research has resulted in improved cancer treatments. So this is looking at the rate of deaths from prostate cancer in the United States from 1999 to 2018. And you can see over that 20-year period, we have a dramatic decrease in the number of gentlemen that are dying of prostate cancer. So we know that these types of research efforts can be successful in helping to improve cancer outcomes. And on Learning and Celebration Days, I would be absolutely remiss if I did not talk about the efforts of my SCI colleagues. And I want to be very clear that these are all the research efforts of my colleagues, and I did not directly contribute to any of them. But this is a smattering of the research that has come out of Swedish Cancer Institute in the last 6 months. And you can see from the screen that Swedish research efforts have made progress on cancer diagnosis, on improved personalized treatments, on minimally invasive surgical approaches, and also on better chemo guidelines. So making our curative treatments less toxic, getting the right treatment to the right patients. Finally, there's been a lot of research on what we do for advanced disease. So my colleague, Dr. Patel, has really been leading the way with engineered cellular therapies for advanced lymphomas. And finally, and not to be forgotten, is we've had a lot of successful research on improving health equity. This is so important for our cancer patients, and we want to make sure that we're reaching with our next generation therapies to all of our patients affected by cancers. However, despite the success of cancer research over the last 20 years, too much work remains to be done. Not all cancers have seen gains in prevention. So on the left, I'm showing you that lung cancer data I've shown you before. On the right, I'm showing you a cancer that's near and dear to my heart, which is melanoma. And while we've made gains in some cancers, I would argue that 54 per 100,000 is still too many lung cancers that were diagnosed. And you can see in other cancers like melanoma, we still, despite it being a preventable cancer caused by UV damage, are seeing a rise in the melanoma cases diagnosed. Furthermore, while I showed you encouraging data for breast cancer, we know that for other kinds of cancers, many cancers are diagnosed too late. So this is looking at that same most recent 5-year period of data from the US cancer statistics for a different cancer, which is pancreas cancer. And here, unlike the breast cancer where 2/3 are diagnosed when it's localized to the organ in which it started, unfortunately, 7 out of 8 pancreas cancers in the US have spread beyond the pancreas at the time of diagnosis, even now. While our treatments have been successful for some, our current treatments fail too many others. So this is looking at 5-year relative survival by cancer type, again, over that last 5-year period for data in the US, 2014 to 2018. I'm delighted to say as a medical oncologist that in 2022, our survival data is even better than this. However, you can see that whereas at the top of the chart, we are leading the way with some outstanding outcomes for many cancers, for other cancers, we really are failing most of our patients with our current therapies. And finally, one of the things that is changing is our abilities to make more progress in cancer. And really, these improved laboratory and computational capabilities offers opportunity. When people ask me what has changed about cancer research in the last 5 years that's meant that we can understand things more completely, I like to talk about a blender and a smoothie. So over the past 20 years, we could look at cancer DNA and we could look at cancer RNA, but we could look at it with all of the cells that were there in the cancer blended together. So rather than looking at blueberries and strawberries and bananas, we saw purple. And we could see that some cancers were more purple and some cancers were more pink, and we could tell that the smoothies taste a little different. But it was very hard to go back and say, what did they put in that smoothie that made it taste a little better or a little worse than the other smoothie? What has happened over the past 5 years has been the single cell revolution, where the biology and the computational abilities can help us to understand cells in character and space, to help make sense of this very complex tumor environment where we're not dealing with cancer cells themselves, but cancer cells over time, where they are and how they interact, to help us understand how to engage the body to more effectively fight off that cancer. With the Paul G. Allen Research Center, we hope to integrate both the biologic sciences, the wet work, and the computer sciences, the dry work that enables our understanding of this wet work to enhance patient outcomes along the cancer continuum. So now instead of that curly line, I'm showing you this all stretched out. And so our Park Research programs, or Paul G. Allen Research Center programs, really extend across this. The first part that we're going to talk about is the initiative for, and where this support comes from is different portions. So again, the bulk of the support is coming from this transformative gift that we're so appreciative of from Mr. Allen and his family, but also benefiting from significant institutional investments, from commercial partnerships and supports, and then research grants that come out of some of these successful research programs. These supports going in help to form 3 different research programs. Again, the first is the Institute for Prevention and Early Detection. Let's help stop cancer before it starts. Next, we have the Center for Immuno-Oncology, which I'm the lead of. How do we use the immune system and engage the immune system to help better fight off cancer once it's established? And finally, the Institute for the Molecular and Genomic Evaluation of Cancer. Across the cancer spectrum, let's understand what's driving this at a molecular level: DNA, RNA, protein interactions. The outputs from this, we hope to have both scientific outputs and, of course, most importantly, improvements in the care for our patients. With the Paul G. Allen Research Center, it's helping to fund the facilities to provide the ideal environment for translational research. So this infrastructure is going to be essential for us to help collect and analyze the data, to take the information from the patients back to the bench and from the bench back to the patients, and iterate that again to help us make rapid improvements in cancer outcomes. So we are in the process of developing next generation physical wet and dry laboratory spaces to help enable translational research, with which we hope to collaborate with many of you in this room and online. The wet laboratory, again, is these approaches to be able to rapidly take specimens not needed for clinical care of patients in order to do sample analysis, to understand things like molecular features, immune cell infiltrates, and also to help enable collaborative research. So we heard earlier today that we can't make health efforts alone. Research is a team effort. We all want cancer cured. And so being able to engage with our collaborative partners, both within and beyond the Providence Network, is critically important. And having the tools to be the leading partner in many of these collaborations is critical. To support the wet work, we need a next generation dry laboratory. So we need the computer's computational ability, know-how to store, analyze, make sense of complicated sources of data that are coming together to help understand what helps us to get better outcomes in cancer care. So the Initiative for Cancer Prevention and Early Detection, led by Dr. Chuck Drescher. Again, our goal here is to help stop cancer before it starts. One of the first steps is to initiate an SCI-wide pan-cancer registry. So let's track everything for patients that are at elevated risk. Let's identify these patients we know to be at risk, help to follow them closely, and let's start to understand how we can look for cancer in not only the traditional ways, but new ways. So immunologic monitoring and interventions to help detect cancer at its earliest levels. Profile lesions that we think could turn into cancer to help us understand what lesions are most likely to turn into cancer and which aren't, so that we know which ones need aggressive treatments and which ones can be carefully observed. And then finally, bringing additional faculty members into the Swedish environment, and also enabling and supporting collaboration to have access to the most advanced state-of-the-art trials in early detection and prevention. I'm going to talk a little bit at length about the Center for Immuno-Oncology, simply because it's my area of interest and the area that I'm currently leading. So it is a new clinical program with both research and laboratory support. And I want to talk a little bit about why we are so excited and focused on immunotherapy. And I'd like to point out that these efforts were started by my predecessor, Dr. John Pagel, who has transitioned into industry, but we're very appreciative for his efforts on helping to get things going. So we know that immunotherapy has made dramatic differences in tumors that were previously difficult or impossible to treat. So I'm showing you 1-year overall survival data comparing newly FDA-approved immunotherapies, and by newly I mean within the last 5 years, to the prior standard of care across different types of diseases. So on the left, I have melanoma, where we have monoclonal antibody immune checkpoint inhibitors. In the next column, relapsed refractory diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, where CAR T-cell is now the FDA-approved second-line therapies due to the direct efforts of Swedish research and my colleague, Dr. Krish Patel, who was very involved in the study that led to this FDA approval earlier this year. Next, I'm showing you leukemia, where bispecific T-cell engagers have made improvements in outcomes. And finally, a more recent FDA approval, which is a TCR antibody combination. So for each of these different immune therapy approaches, let's improve the body's immune fight against cancer. We've seen big improvements in outcomes of our patients. But we also know that for most of our cancers, immunotherapy isn't where it needs to be. So this is looking at response rates to anti-PD-1 immune checkpoint inhibitors, which are so successful in certain cancers. Melanoma's 50% response rate. Others, our response rates to these approaches, let's engage the body to fight these cancers, are dismal. Does it mean the immune system is not important? No, it means we haven't learned all of the ways that the body is getting around, or the body, or the cancer is avoiding the body's immune response to the cancer. There are multiple immune approaches that are in development and clinical practice for engaging the body's white blood cells, their bacteria, virus, and natural cancer-fighting cells in the fight against cancer. These range from approaches such as vaccines, which we know are critically important for cancer prevention, are not yet there for cancer therapy, although we hope that they will be there someday. Cytokine therapies, adoptive cell transfers, so our engineered and our non-engineered cellular therapies, immune checkpoint inhibitors, and then some of these newer approaches, including things like oncolytic viruses. I just want to speak a little bit about engineered cellular therapies because there's been so much interest and success in these in the liquid or leukemia lymphoma space over the past few years. So how these therapies work is we basically remove white blood cells, typically T cells, from the blood using a machine looking like a dialysis machine. We take these cells back to the lab and engineer them using a broken HIV virus to put a gene for something called a chimeric antigen receptor on the cell. You can fundamentally think of this like a mullet. On the outside of the cell, you have an antibody, and on the inside of the cell, you have a T cell receptor. The antibody sticks to a protein that's on the outside of the cancer cell and specifically directs the T cell, or the type of immune cell that normally kills virus-infected and precancerous cells, right there on the surface of the cancer cell. So we take these immune cells out of the body, use genetics to engineer them to specifically recognize the cancer, and then put them back into the patient so that then they're a living drug and can help to directly fight and engage the immune system to fight the cancer. We know that immunotherapy response mechanisms are very complex. So when you talk about a chemotherapeutic drug that is directly laying down on a cancer cell, you've got the chemo and you've got the cancer cell, but you may not have very many other things in between. And you can study this pretty readily in a dish, right? You can grow the cancer cell in a dish, you can drop the chemo on, you can say, does the cell die or does the cell live? When you talk about immunotherapy, you have to talk about not only the tumor cell, which I'm showing here in a picture that I've taken from one of my reviews in blue, but all of the other cells that are in the microenvironment. The CD8 T cell, which is the type of immune cell that we think is so critical for killing off the cancer cells to get immunotherapy effect, but also the other immune cells, both in the tumor microenvironment and the lymph node. And this means to understand what's going on with whether an immune therapy works or not, we have to have similarly sophisticated research approaches that let us understand what's going on with the individual cells in the microenvironment, and we can't just study the cancer and the drug alone in a dish. And this is where the type of transformative technologies that are coming out, which let us look at things at single cell level, are so impactful for helping us to understand whether treatments, whether and why treatments succeed. Another thing that's tricky with immunotherapy is that it has really unique and unpredictable toxicities. So with a chemotherapy drug, a classic chemotherapy drug, I can tell a patient you're probably going to lose your hair, your white blood cell count's going to go down, and then it's going to go back up. You're going to get some nausea, but I can help that with this wonderful supportive care medicines that we have to help take that away. And you're going to lose your hair about 3 weeks into treatment, and it's going to come back about 6 weeks after you stop. We can give very detailed information to people about what the side effects are going to be of the treatment, when they're going to happen, and we know what usually happens for most patients. With immunotherapy, because we are giving a treatment that works on living cells in the body, and we don't control the number of the living cells or what those living cells see, the toxicity, rather than being very consistent and dose related and with a consistent time frame, now all of a sudden has very unique, unusual, and unpredictable toxicities, right? There's a factor there in that immune system. It's interacting with the gut microenvironment. It's interacting with all the viruses and bacteria you've seen before. It's interacting with those cancer cells that create a very interesting side effect profile. So many patients get no side effects from immunotherapy. And of course, we want all patients to get no side effects from immunotherapy. But others get two major forms of immunotherapy toxicity that are relatively unique within cancer. The first is an acute toxicity from the cells killing the cancer too hard and growing too quickly. It is something that we call cytokine release syndrome, and it has a sepsis-like physiology. So these patients often need ICU care. As part of having this severe overreaction of the immune system, they can even develop something called ICANS, which is a form of neurologic dysfunction, typically reversible, but I've seen it to the point of coma, where a patient is not talking, needs assistance breathing, not protecting their airway. And again, I mean, these overreactions are unpredictable. They can be quite severe. They can require an extensive amount of medical care, and they require a lot of expertise of physicians, nursing, other staff, respiratory therapists, other staff members to know how to most effectively manage and treat these. The good news is we've learned a lot in the last 5 years, and usually the side effect is very, very treatable. We also see more chronic toxicities of immunotherapies. And with the cytokine release syndrome, we typically see those with the bispecific antibodies and the engineered cell therapies. With the more chronic immune-related adverse events, we typically see those with the immune checkpoint inhibitors. We call these immune-related adverse events because it's a bucket term for the immune system attacking absolutely anything. It can happen weeks, months, or years into immunotherapy treatment. It does not happen the day that you get infused with the drug most of the time. It just comes on. It's very unpredictable, and it requires us to be really good communicators to all of the subspecialists that are around us, which is one of the reasons that I'm very happy to be at Swedish, where we have all these subspecialists, where if I see a rheumatologic or an ophthalmologic or a cardiac or a renal toxicity of these immune drugs, that I've got friends and colleagues that are capable in helping us to navigate the course. So the Center for Immuno-Oncology is really looking at putting the tools and resources together to help facilitate the immuno-oncology research. So one piece of this is clinical care. Again, we need this specific expertise to most effectively and safely give these immunotherapy drugs. The second piece is the translational piece. How are we going to get tumor samples, blood samples back from the bedside to the bench to understand these complex problems and make sure that we get the information in a way that we can understand who's talking to whom, when, and how. When, where, and how, I should say. A third piece is the analysis. These types of approach are computational heavy, so having that dry lab infrastructure in place to be able to do these next generation analyses. And then finally, the tools to facilitate collaboration and communication. We are not going to cure cancer alone. We need to be talking to colleagues both for the best clinical care of our patients and the best research impact. The third piece of the Paul G. Allen Research Center is the Initiative for Molecular and Genomic Evaluation of Cancer, led by my colleague, Dr. Hank Kaplan. He has built one of the most comprehensive databases of breast cancer in the nation and the world. And what we really hope to do is to annotate this in a very detailed molecular way and extend these resources to many other types of cancers. So what does the Paul G. Allen Research Center mean for you as a Swedish investigator, a Swedish researcher, a research interested Swedish doctor, nurse, caregiver, research staff, anyone on our Swedish team? So a few things that are really exciting. So one is core lab capabilities, both wet and dry lab capabilities to help support translational research efforts. A second thing that I'm going to talk about here is the Innovative Investigator Fund. So I've got a slide on this momentarily. And then a third piece is, again, communication and collaboration is so important to helping catalyze ongoing research efforts. So we really want to provide peer support for researchers and say, how can we help you make the most impact with your research? There's a SharePoint site that we've listed here on the slide. So thank you, Doug Keeper and Lauren Garvey for helping to get the SharePoint site up live and running. And I want to call your attention to one of the pieces on that SharePoint site, which is something called the Innovative Investigator Fund. We do have a deadline coming up in May 15th of this year. We've already received several applications, but we're looking forward to more. This fund is seed funding for early ideas that are not yet at the point where there's enough preliminary data to go get larger grants, that has a simple 2-page letter of intent. The PI needs to be working within Swedish, and we would like it to be broadly cancer focused. But beyond that, you know, we're interested in any projects that help to support the Paul G. Allen Research Center mission. And Mr. Allen and his family has identified this mission is pretty broad, right? So if it's touching cancer at any point from prevention to survivorship, we are interested in reviewing grants along that spectrum. I put the link below, and again, we're happy to get you more information if interested, and this is all available on the SharePoint. So I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak today. I'd like to thank Chuck and Hank for allowing me to share the vision for the program. I'd like to thank the Swedish Foundation and to all of the donors that help support research here at Swedish. Sarah Jo for providing excellent leadership for the program. I especially need to thank the Paul G. Allen Research Center team, particularly Doug, who helped with many of the slides. So thank you, Doug, Lauren, Chris, and the whole team. The members of all of the working groups, there are more than 25 of them, so I couldn't list them all here today, but I really appreciate the time and efforts of my many colleagues who are helping to make this research program a success. And finally, of course, the SCI research team under the excellent leadership of Dr. Philip Gold and all those that participate in making Swedish cancer research so successful. Finally, I'd like to thank the patients, families, and research participants for whom the research is for and without whom the research is not possible. Windows will shut down. Okay. All right, so thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you, Dr. Paulson. That was amazing. You know, for those of you that are watching virtually or in the audience here, this is really remarkable research that's being done. And I think the most amazing thing is that it's being done outside a university setting. This is the sort of thing that you would find at the University of Washington or at any major university, but it's happening here. And so we're really grateful for you, Dr. Paulson, as well as the rest of the team. And this is just the beginning. This has just been announced and really just being built. Think about where we're going to be in 5 years once this is up and running. So thank you very much for your work, and really look forward to seeing more accomplishments. Excellent. So the second part of our day today is to recognize some of the active projects that are ongoing. And we had an abstract competition from which selected abstracts were reviewed by experts, and the best of those projects are being presented today as podium presentations. The first one is going to be with Dr. David Zucker from the Cancer Institute. Dr. Zucker is a physiatrist who is at the interface between disease and rehabilitation, and he's going to be presenting this morning. Dr. Zucker.
All right, so I apologize for coming back up, but I guess there were some late questions that came in due to technical issues. The first question related to what do I think about new technologies for cancer detection? So again, I lead the Center for Immuno-Oncology, so I have a very immune-focused bias. I also have to disclose that I'm the inventor, although I receive no compensation, from an antibody or serology-based assay for Merkel cell carcinoma recurrence, which is a type of skin cancer. So I believe that the immune system is going to be one of the ways that we're better able to detect cancer at early stages. And the reason for this is that the immune system is a natural amplifier. So if you see something that's offensive to the body, whether that is an infection or a cancer, the immune system has a positive feedback loop, meaning it grows over and over and over and over again to amplify that response. So it means a small thing can cause a big response, which can help to overcome some of the barriers to other antigen-based or protein-based ways of detecting cancer, where you have to have a large volume of cancer for it to hit on the blood test. One of the limitations to date in using these types of approaches to detect cancer has been that we don't know what the immune system sees in cancer. We are starting to unlock that on certain cancers, and I'm very hopeful that over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be able to better understand what the immune system sees, both antibodies and T cells, in terms of cancer antigens to help with those early detection efforts. But really, I don't want to speak on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Chuck Drescher, who is truly the expert on early detection of cancer. And hopefully he can give you more information, and I would encourage you to reach out to him about different screening approaches coming down the pipe. The second question was cancer detection information for a lay audience. So I don't have any of that information here with me today, but certainly scientific communication across the 3 pillars is something that we're hoping to enhance. And I will be absolutely delighted to feed back to the Paul G. Allen Research Center Advisory Leadership Team that communication through both our virtual and physical presence needs to be extended to not only researchers, but also patients and non-medical staff. I think it's really important that we tell our patients what we're doing and why, because it makes our research so much more meaningful and important to them. And so hopefully the next time that one of us is presenting at next year's Learning and Celebration Day, we'll have some materials that we can help disseminate there.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Again, my name is Dr. Amir. I'm the Medical Director for Academic Affairs for Swedish and part of the planning committee for this wonderful 2-day event. You've just heard from Dr. Poulsen describing the successes of the newly created Paul G. Allen Research Center here at Swedish. We are now transitioning to the another part of our presentation today, which is highlighting some of the work that's being done at the front lines with our various researchers. The first of our presentations will be Dr. David Zucker, who is a physiatrist here at the Cancer Institute. He'll be discussing the PROMIS cancer function brief 3D profile. Dr. Zucker.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is David Zucker, and my topic today is creation of the PROMIS cancer function 3D profile and its implementation at Providence Swedish Cancer Institute here in Seattle. I'd like to acknowledge my co-investigators and our funding source. And I'd also like to acknowledge our Providence Build team and clinical implementation team. Without the help of this very large team, this project would never have been possible. And I have no conflicts of interest. So the purpose of the study was to develop a patient-reported outcome measures designed specifically to and calibrated for cancer patient function. Background, cancer rehabilitation lacks a targeted psychometrically validated PRO, that's a patient-reported outcome functional measure. And for cancer patients, existing measures of function do not provide, number one, an adequate a snapshot of global function. Number two, serve to focus rehabilitation interventions, or three, provide longitudinal disability outcomes. So methods. First, my research team and I identified functional domains that provide a snapshot of global cancer function. And we landed on three domains. One is physical function, one is fatigue, and one is social participation. That's the third one. Then within each of these domains, we selected candidate items, and out of that, we created a 21-item questionnaire. The next step was to administer the 21-item pilot questionnaire to 616 cancer rehabilitation patients, and this was done at 6 participating institutions. The first data analysis project was to descriptive statistics to analyze the clinical and demographic data. Secondly, we did regression modeling to assess discrimination across anchoring variables. Our anchoring variables were the KPS and the ECOG status, performance status, and also to detect stepwise increases across response options in each item. For those of you unfamiliar with KPS, it's a Karnofsky performance status score, and the ECOG is the Eastern Cooperative Oncology Group performance score. Third, we used item response theory to identify the highest performing of the 21 items. And for those of you unfamiliar with item response theory, I'd like to talk a little bit about it. Item response theories, you can see here on the left, I make a little thing here if I can get this to. So item response theory is like Lego blocks that can be put together in any of a numerous number of ways to conform to a specific clinical need. So these are the Lego blocks, and imagine that each of these Lego blocks is an individual item. The items are, each item stands on its own, and therefore can be combined with other items in any way you want. So think of it kind of like an IRT model. The questionnaire is like contour fitting the questionnaire to the specific clinical situation. In contrast, classical test theory is like a Lego structure that's already put together, and therefore it's locked into place, and there's a little flexibility to meet a specific clinical need. So a Lego structure that's already together, a questionnaire that's already fixed in place, can be quite blunt because you're psychometrically locked into a specific set of items. And sometimes you get a really good fit, sometimes you get a great fit, but not always. So results, we identified 12 of the 21 candidate items in our pilot study. By IRTO analysis, we picked those that had the highest information density, those with unimodal distribution, and those that were non-redundant. And then validity was assessed using regression modeling, and we found very strong associations with the anchoring items, the KPS and the ECOG scores across trait ranges, multiple domains, and subdomains. So the next step was to implement it. And that created the Promise Cancer Function 3D profile with 3 domains and 12 items. So the functional domains, again, physical function, 6 items, fatigue, 3 items, and social participation, 3 items. So we had our questionnaire. Next, what we did was we implemented. And we implemented this with the Providence build team, incredibly hardworking, fabulous, committed people working beyond 5 o'clock with me. And we created a MyChart questionnaire. So the 12 items are available to patients via MyChart. And right here, I have a sample question. This is one from the fatigue domain. And here's the question. And then there are 5 possible options. The patient then clicks continue, and it goes on to the next item for completion of the questionnaire. Then what's really cool about the way it's set up in Epic is it's available in synopsis. So the Epic synoptic view will show each domain, physical function, fatigue, social participation. And then here it shows a line graph of the outcomes of 6 independent measures from end of October to the end of March of 2022. So you see that. It's also, the synoptic view also offers many, many other views, including individual items, graphs of how people do across time. It's really fabulous. So discussion. So we demonstrated that the brief 3D profile has high information density, that it adds no significant clinical burden to patients or clinical staff. It takes less than 5 minutes to complete. It also can be done on an iPad. It validates the use of the 12-item Promise Cancer Function 3D profile in outpatient cancer rehabilitation clinics. This instrument also meets a unique and heretofore unmet need of assessment and clinical decision-making for clinicians and others caring for cancer patients. And it is, to our knowledge, the first specialized short form of its kind. Continued work. So a further validation study entitled Responsiveness and Interpretation of the Promise, et cetera, profile. Actually, as I said, it has been accepted for publication pending revisions, but we learned yesterday that it has been accepted and will be published in the journal Cancer. Another psychometric investigation is beginning to establish cut points, and there's actually another one where we've done secondary data analysis on breast cancer patients, and we have some really nice outcomes and validation for that population as well. The questionnaire is being piloted in the Cancer Rehabilitation Medicine Clinic at Providence Swedish Cancer Institute. Here's our publications, and thank you, and any questions? Doug.
Thank you, Dr. Zucker. That was really wonderful. It's really nice to see something like this that is built at home but can be scaled to the entire country or to our system. How do you propose that this can be used in our, for example, in my colorectal clinic? Is this something that we could use for our patients to screen patients, or is this something that would really need to be done in a rehab clinic?
Well, the goal is to have it be done throughout the Cancer Institute, and also to have it implemented in Epic, the national Epic system. It could be used in your clinic. Right now, it's in the pilot phase. There's more validation studies that need to become. I think the key thing at this point is cut points. The cut points we used are standard cut points from the Promise Bank, the NIH Toolbox Promise Bank. But yes, that's the goal.
Are there questions in the audience, Mr. Keeper?
I have 2.
Hold on a second. Let me get you the microphone so the people online can hear you.
I know it's always a little difficult to talk about results before they're published, but generally, what was the size of the validation cohort that you're publishing?
Well, it was all 616 patients.
Okay.
So we did it on the whole kit and caboodle.
And when you talked about being able to make this accessible by iPad or like some type of a tablet device, is there currently a plan for transitioning those data into Epic from the iPad devices, or would that be like manually transitioned? Do you have
It'll be, my understanding, the iPad it's all set up, it's been built, but it hasn't been implemented yet in our clinic. My understanding from the Epic people is that the crunching of the data and the collating the data is kind of a separate process within the Swedish system. And they have something called, I think it's called Snowflake, which is a very large cloud, and any person can access it and query for their specific patients or for a population. But that's not in place yet. It might be in place in other places at Swedish, but it's not for this.
You know, I think the interesting thing is how do we get this just in time to our patients, right? So it would be nice to have it on their personal devices that they could enter through their MyChart portal and then have those data come in. And so identifying those patients is the challenge, and being able to trigger that this be sent to them to complete.
That's already happening in our clinic. It's automatically uploaded to the patient's MyChart. So when they when they check into their visit, it's there. And you can add other questions as well. The problem we're facing is that the intake that comes on MyChart is loaded with everything from insurance information, past medical history, medications. And so a lot of people just say, I'm not going to do that. So we're not getting great response from all patients. Ideally, what I'd like to see happen is that is on MyChart, and it comes sort of as a separate, and then our MAs or clinical staff will say, please be sure to do this if you don't do anything else. The other thing is that the iPads will be available in clinic. So a patient, when they come in to check in, they can just do it on the iPad.
Yeah, no, my question was actually to do one step earlier. So when they have the diagnosis of cancer.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Trigger to them at that point.
That would be great. Yeah, that could be done. It would just simply be a matter of creating the workflow.
Or in periodically then through their care.
That would, yes, that would be, that's one of the goals. So you want to screen people earlier. Just one other point is that, you know, the ECOG and KPS are used frequently for performance status, but that's not a very good measure. And there's lots of data that suggests that it doesn't really tell you what's going on.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Thank you for the great work, Dr. Zucker. We appreciate you, and you're really at the interface between living and caring for our patients. So thank you very much for your work.
You're most welcome. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Our next presentation is by Ms. Catherine Karlak, who is one of our nutritionists here at Swedish, discussing the electronic health record workflows impacting nursing documentation. Is it Mr. Dr. Karlak? Welcome.
So good morning. My name is Catherine, and I'm a dietitian in the surgical ICU here at First Hill. And today I'm going to be talking about how electronic health record workflows impact nursing documentation and delivery of nutrition modular products to ICU patients. And before I begin and dive into my QI project, I want to define a few terms. The first is electronic health record workflow. Is this? Okay. Is this better? Okay, great. So all I mean by electronic health record workflow is how do we use the EHR to do our jobs? How do I, as a dietitian, communicate to a nurse what nutrition products to give? And how, in turn, does a nurse document that the products have been administered? Second term is nutrition modular product. So these are medical nutrition products that are designed to augment the nutrition that an enterally fed patient or a tube fed patient is receiving from their enteral formula. There are a wide variety of enteral formulas available on the market, designed to meet a variety of patient needs and disease states, but the protein-calorie ratio of many of them falls short, particularly for critically ill or for post-op patients. These are photos of protein packets, one of our most commonly used nutrition modular products. These are basically shots of protein and not much else. They're designed to bring up the protein provision of an enteral feeding regimen to meet both a patient's protein and calorie needs. And this enables us to both prevent the development of malnutrition and also to treat it. I don't think anyone here is going to be surprised to hear that malnutrition is bad for patients, but you might be surprised to hear how common it is. It's estimated that a third of patients that come into the hospital are malnourished on admit, and another third become malnourished after becoming admitted. And this is associated with a host of negative outcomes: increased hospital length of stay, increased infection rate, increased time in the vent. Patients who are malnourished are 4 times as likely to develop a hospital-acquired pressure injury, and they're much less likely to be able to heal from this wound, or any wound for that matter. Adequate protein provision in the ICU in particular is associated with improved outcomes like decreased time on the vent, decreased mortality, and decreased infection rates. So in spite of the importance of these nutrition products in preventing and treating malnutrition, there isn't actually a standardized location in the electronic health record for these products. But there are 2 predominant workflows that most hospitals use. The first is the enteral feeding order workflow. And the enteral feeding order is used to convey all information about all nutrition products that are given via the feeding tube. And to illustrate how this workflow works and some of the pitfalls associated with it, I'm going to ask you to play a little game. So on the left, we have one of those comics where you try and find differences between the panels. I'd like you to imagine you're a nurse. You see the dietitian just updated the tube feeding order. Can you spot the 6 differences between these tube feeding orders? Okay, did everybody find them? That obviously wasn't enough time, right? And that's the big issue with this workflow. All the information is here, but it's not presented in a way that is easily readable or accessible. There's nothing to trigger a nurse to know if the dose or the frequency of a nutrition modular product has changed, or to alert them if prior doses are overdue. Another issue with this workflow is that documentation has to be done elsewhere in the chart, in our case, the flow sheet. And again, each individual component here needs to be documented separately each time it's administered. It's a very time-intensive workflow. So because of this, some hospitals have adopted a MAR-based workflow. And this basically enables them to harness the power of the medical administration record to apply the 5 rights of medication administration to nutritional products. The 5 rights being the right patient, the right dose, the right time, the right route, and the right product. These are some screenshots of what it looks like in practice. The bottom screenshot is what it used to look like at Swedish. We actually had select nutrition modular products on our MAR, but when we underwent EPIC instance alignment, we transitioned to an EN order workflow, thus allowing for a direct comparison between the efficacy of the 2 workflows. And thus my QI project was born. So I had 2 main questions when I began this project. One was, how often were nurses documenting protein-containing modular products using each workflow? And the second was, based on this documentation, how much of goal protein provision were patients receiving? And to answer these questions, we conducted chart audits at 3 time points. The first in fall of 2018 by accessing historical EPIC for data on when we were using the MAR workflow. And then again in in summer and fall of 2019 after adopting the EN order workflow. Also in fall 2019, some dietitians at Sacred Heart did a comparable audit. They had always used an EN order workflow, and so represented what we could reasonably expect to improve to as we became more familiar with the workflow. And then I did some basic stats to determine if the differences between workflows and the differences between hospitals were significant. They were. When nutrition modular products appeared on our MAR, documentation was done 99.9% of the time. And this isn't to say that patients received the products that often, but if they didn't, the reason for not administering them was clearly noted. Either the product hadn't arrived from the kitchen or maybe the patient refused. After adopting an e-in-order workflow, our documentation rates plummeted to 17% and only improved to 30% as we became more familiar with the workflow. Comparing our documentation rates more in depth with Sacred Heart, the comparison hospital, they did observe higher rates of partial and full documentation. Our rates are shown on the top graph and Sacred Heart is on the bottom graph. So we had full documentation done in 18.5% and partial documentation done in 23.5% of instances at our hospital, compared to 34%, or excuse me, 34% and 24% respectively at Sacred Heart. But what I really want to emphasize here is that in the majority of instances at both hospitals using an e-in-order workflow, documentation was either partial, was incomplete, or it wasn't done at all. And that's indicated by the gray and the black on these charts. So to recap so far, protein modular products are essential to both preventing and treating malnutrition. There's no standardized location for these products in the electronic health record workflow, but there are two predominant workflows that most hospitals use. Based on my results here, one is more effective than the other, and it's unfortunately not the workflow that we are currently using. So some of you might be saying right now, wait, hold on, you're using documentation as a proxy for delivery. You can't possibly know what these patients are actually receiving. But that's precisely the point. Say I have a patient whose wound isn't healing, and I go to the flow sheet and I see nothing. How do I know, is the patient's wound not healing because the nutrition prescription is inadequate or because they aren't receiving their nutrition as prescribed? I can't possibly know. And I want to be clear, this isn't meant to be an indictment of nurses. Our nurses are awesome, and they very clearly can complete documentation as witnessed by the almost perfect documentation rates using a MAR workflow. This is just an illustration of how an inefficient electronic health record workflow makes life difficult for everyone. And this includes patients. Some of our patients were only receiving 23 to 27% of prescribed protein based on documentation. And this puts them at substantial risk for developing malnutrition. So maybe they stay on the vent a few days longer. Maybe they get a HAPI. Or if they came in super malnourished, maybe this impedes their ability to even survive the hospitalization. So I've shared this data and this concern both across Swedish and at a systems level. And the response has been unanimous, like this is a workflow that needs to be optimized and a problem that needs to be solved. But it does require prioritization at the systems level. It's not something we can just fix at Swedish. Epic would need to be changed for all of Providence. So in the meantime, I'm interested in continuing to collect data on the problem to better understand it. I am working on a survey for acute care nurses to quantify their perceptions about ease of use of these workflows. I'd also like to collaborate with dietitians across the system to look at EQVR or electronic quality variance report data, looking at problems with all nutrition order administration, like patients receiving the incorrect tube feeding formula or not receiving any of their scheduled oral supplements. And the thought is too that if we do optimize EPIC, these would serve as great pre and post measures to gauge the success of the optimization. So in conclusion, these workflows impact nutrition delivery, and there's definitely room for improvement with our current workflows. I am optimistic though, given how other hospitals have resolved this issue and the support that exists across our system to fix it, that we will be able to optimize EPIC and to get our patients the nutrition that they require. A big thanks to the organizers of this event for allowing me time to talk about my QI project. These are my references. And if there's time, I'm happy to answer a couple of questions.
Thank you. That was amazing. You know, this is the whole point of these 2 days of celebration and education is to highlight the variety of research that's being done and scholarly work that's being done at Swedish. This is the sort of thing that is almost at the complete opposite side of the spectrum from what you heard from Dr. Paulson and what you heard from Dr. Zucker, right? But impacts our patients day to day. And so the use of scholarly tools, the use of research tools, the use of statistical tools to identify a problem and find a way to fix it is at the front lines of caring for our patients. And here is something that will impact our patients across the 52 hospital system and likely is not unique to Swedish or to Providence, and may highlight epic workflow problems across more than 50% of the hospitals in the country. So thank you for that. That's really, really wonderful. I mean, imagine saving one person from a complication just by fixing the workflow. I think that's really amazing. Are there any questions in the audience? What hurdles do you see for making the change, either back to where we had in the MAR, getting 99% compliance, or changing the current workflow to be able to correct the current problems? With the understanding that more documentation adds to burnout, adds to some of the dissatisfiers that our nurses have to deal with. So finding something that's simple yet effective is critical.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is the same with many optimization requests. It just requires time and money. There's a lot of different priorities that need to be done in Epic. But I do want to highlight that it would be a one-time investment, whereas when you're looking at malnutrition, it's insidious. It factors into so many patient outcomes, and it's very costly to both patients and the hospital.
Starving.
And these are recurrent costs. So I'm pushing for the MAR workflow in particular because it's well studied. There's my data. There's actually, for something that's a fairly niche workflow issue, there's published data that is very conclusively showing that a MAR-based workflow is efficient. I don't think it's surprising because the issue here is with administration and recording the administration. So it's no surprise that a medical administration record is a tool that's helpful for getting those documentation rates up. Particularly, as you said, it eases the burden on nurses significantly. And it makes it easy for all clinicians to both, access, see what volume was given, what product was given. It just makes everyone's life easier. But it would be a big change. It requires Epic analyst hours, it requires go live and phases, and it's a project.
Any idea of the cost requirement?
So I did ask the specific question. Florida is who pioneered, they call it the Nutrition Administration Record. So they had the first big Epic build. And I asked their architect, she said, because it exists, we wouldn't be recreating the wheel. I think she estimated 60 analyst hours for creating the new order sets, and another 20 to build it out and go live. I'm not sure what that translates into cost, but when I've asked,
pretty low to me.
It seemed reasonable, especially when you consider that one HAPI can cost the hospital upwards of 40K, was what I've been told by the nurse who tracks that. So, see some questions there.
Dr. Zucker.
Thank you. Great presentation. This is also a huge problem for our Cancer Institute outpatients. Any thoughts about implementing something in a parallel fashion for our outpatient clinics?
Just to clarify, would this be for supplements they're prescribed to take at home, tracking it, or?
It would be assessing what their nutritional status is. There's a malnutrition pro at this point, but then tracking those patients and making sure they get in to see dietitians.
Yeah, so it can be difficult to assess malnutrition because it's based on a variety of factors. Inpatient, we use a screen that's been validated by the American Society for Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition, where patients are diagnosed with criteria, and that's appropriate for both inpatient and outpatient. Our dietitians at SCI use that. I think the most important thing is ensuring reliable contact with a dietitian to assess them through their journey and assess, is their malnutrition worsening, is it improving? But in terms of the MAR workflow, I'm not sure how that would look outpatient. Yeah, no, I mean, I think having screens that are integrated into Epic to capture nutrition and to bring it to the attention of all clinicians can only help patients.
What are your plans for publication?
So I presented this data as an abstract at a poster session at the American Society for Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition. My dream is that we will go live, we will optimize EPIC. I can collect my pre-data and post-data, and then I'd love to work that up for probably either Nutrition and Clinical Practice or the Journal of Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition.
Well, it looks like it's ready to go with what you have now. I mean, that would be a follow-up paper, but I think the data you've shown and the analysis you've had is really pretty remarkable already. There is one statement here, not a question, but a comment from the chat. As an RN, I hope that dietitian works closely with the RNs to find modalities that are feasible with their workflow. Nurses spend a lot of time documenting, which is crucial. But the more time they spend documenting is less time providing care to the patients. I think we've acknowledged that
100% agree.
This is a way to improve that for them. Very good. Another question from the chat. Dietitians are always trying to make the workflow administration easier for RNs. The issue this presentation is trying to address would make things easier and more efficient for the RNs. Agreed. Yes.
Yes, I actually had the same pretty much comment as well. I think I saw the documentation says given. I think that's great, but I think if they kind of like, as a registered nurse point of view, if they could make this like scanning way where you could scan that protein, scan the probiotic yogurt, whatever it is, and then document like 50%, 75%, 100% options in there. So if they make it like that, I think it would be more crucial to have that, because sometimes if you just say given, not given, it's like really not 100% the patient actually receive the product or not.
Yeah, and you touch on two issues here. The first is that barcode scanning is great for easing documentation, and it also is a hard stop to prevent patients from receiving the incorrect product, which is a huge issue right now and a huge patient safety issue. Looking at the U Florida build, they did have options like you selected, you scan it, and then you can also put the volume of product given, which is of interest to most clinicians.
Absolutely, and also this way actually it will lessen nurses' workflow and documentation, because you're just basically scanning and instead of going to workflow, documenting everything, forgetting to document or not giving it to the patient altogether by not looking through those complicated order sets that you can barely find the right things.
Yeah, keeping it simple is the goal.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Well, thank you. That was an amazing presentation. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and good luck on both the publication, but also implementing the changes for our patients. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right. Staying on time here, our next presentation is by Dr. Stephanie Carr. Dr. Carr is one of the colorectal fellows. She's a minimally invasive colorectal fellow in our department, and she's going to be presenting on a comparison of two different treatment modalities for anal fissure disease. Dr. Carr.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Carr, as Dr. Vastaros mentioned. I'm one of the minimally invasive colorectal fellows here at Swedish. Sure. So my name is Dr. Carr. I'm one of the colorectal fellows here at Swedish, and today I'm going to present my research entitled The Efficacy of Chemodenervation compared to lateral internal sphincterotomy for the treatment of anal fissures. So anal fissures are a very common disease of the anus. It's actually one of the most common causes of pain and bleeding for patients, and it's a problem that we see very regularly in the clinic. This is a bit of a graphic picture here, but you can see the tear in the epithelial lining at the distal anal canal. This is between the dentate line and the anal verge. And we diagnose this based on symptoms, but also a physical exam. On physical exam, we perform an extraction of the buttocks, which is spreading the buttocks, in order to take a look at the outside of the anus here, which is what this picture shows. And you can see the small tear here. Also on exam, we do a digital rectal exam and feel for hypertonicity of the anal sphincter. This disease is often caused by an inciting event such as a hard stool. This can cause a tear here as pictured. This causes the anal sphincter, internal anal sphincter, to go into spasm. And afterwards, when patients do pass a stool, they often have quite a bit of pain. So they describe it as a sharp pain and later a dull pain after actually passing the stool. Patients can also see blood, most commonly on the toilet paper. So the goal for treatment of an anal fissure is to decrease the hypertonicity of that sphincter muscle. And there's a few things that patients can do before we actually even see them in clinic. One is to avoid hard stools. This can be done with a bulking agent like fiber. We also want patients to try to avoid diarrhea. For symptomatic relief at home, they can perform a sitz bath, which is just sitting in a small amount of warm water, which will help to relax that sphincter muscle. Once we do see them in the clinic and diagnose them with a fissure, we start with topical treatments. One of the most common treatments that we use is nifedipine, which is a calcium channel blocker that works to relax that sphincter muscle. This is a very well-tolerated medication. It has very minimal side effects, and it's often compounded with lidocaine, which helps with the pain factor, as that's one of the patient's biggest complaints. Diltiazem is another calcium channel blocker that can be used, as well as nitroglycerin. This is a vasodilator, and this isn't quite as well tolerated. About 30% of patients will have pretty significant headaches that keep them from continuing use of the medication. So we have patients continue this treatment for about 4 to 6 weeks before reevaluation. If patients do not improve with medical management, then we proceed with surgical treatment. And there's two major options. One is chemodenervation, or a Botox injection into the internal anal sphincter. And another is what's called a lateral internal sphincterotomy, or LIS. And this involves actually dividing a portion of the internal sphincter to help relax that muscle. These are outpatient treatments that are done in an outpatient surgical center with patients under moderate sedation. The Botox injection, we most often use about 100 units of Botox, and this is injected either into the internal anal sphincter or in between the space between the internal and external sphincter. The sphincterotomy can be performed in a few different ways. Some of our surgeons perform a closed sphincterotomy. What's pictured here is an open sphincterotomy. There's actually a cut in the mucosa. The sphincter is actually identified, and then a portion of it is divided. The amount of sphincter that's divided is determined based on the hypertonicity of the sphincter as well as the length of the fissure. And this is variable per patient. There are risks with all types of surgeries, and lateral internal sphincterotomy is a very successful procedure, but there is a risk of incontinence. This can be either to gas or to stool itself, which is one of the uncommon but dreaded complications of the operation. So for my project, we wanted to look at the number of patients that underwent both Botox injection as well as sphincterotomy. Specifically, we wanted to determine the number of patients who underwent Botox but failed that treatment and later proceeded with a sphincterotomy, which is a more definitive procedure. We hypothesized that the sphincterotomy would still remain the gold standard as it is in practice, but we did want to evaluate how many of our patients actually succeeded with Botox. In order to perform this, we did a retrospective chart review, looking at the last 5 years of data. We looked at the number of patients who underwent both procedures and their success rates. And we ultimately identified 6 patients who failed chemodenervation with Botox who later went on to have a sphincterotomy. We did exclude any inflammatory bowel disease patients. So most fissures are found in the midline, either anterior or posteriorly. Fissures that are not found on the midline can be concerning for inflammatory bowel disease, and the treatment for those patients is different. It focuses on treatment of the inflammatory bowel disease itself, and therefore those patients were excluded. So ultimately, we found 298 patients that underwent both one of the procedures, I should say. Fortunately, about 75% of our patients were lost to follow-up. We had planned to follow them for 3 months to look for resolution, but 75 of our patients, about 30%, never actually returned for any follow-up. Therefore, we were left with 189 patients who underwent sphincterotomy and 38 who underwent Botox. There was no difference in the age or the BMI of the patients in either group, but there was a difference in gender. Female patients were more likely to undergo Botox injection. And there might be a few reasons for this. Female patients often have a shorter sphincter, and any female patient who has given birth has a higher risk of injury to the sphincter just due to obstetrical complications. And so they can be more prone to having incontinence with a sphincterotomy. And so with 76% of our Botox patients were actually female, compared to just 44% of the sphincterotomy patients. In terms of results, 84% of patients undergoing sphincterotomy did have resolution of their fissure at 3 months. And we determined this based on their follow-up visits, looking for symptoms, as well as an actual fissure on exam. Only 32% of our Botox patients had resolution at 3 months. And then, as I mentioned, 25% of our patients were lost to follow-up, which is a pretty significant amount. Ultimately, we determined that LAS does remain the gold standard for treatment. It's over 2.5 times more effective than Botox. There was no difference between the effectiveness of male and female patients. So even though more female patients were actually undergoing the Botox injection, it was not necessarily more effective for them. Of the 6 patients that we found that underwent Botox, failed that, and then had a sphincterotomy, only 75% of those patients had resolution after 3 months. I do want to mention some limitations. We had more sphincterotomy patients compared to Botox patients, and we had a pretty significant amount of patients that were lost to follow-up. The operations were performed by 6 different surgeons who do all perform the operations a little bit differently. And there was no way to standardize this through the system. So the differences include the open and closed sphincterotomy, as well as the amount of Botox injected and where the Botox was injected. I also wanted to note that at some of our campuses, we use Dysport instead of Botox, which is similar, but it's not the exact same product. So ultimately, sphincterotomy was best for our patients, but in some patients, like female patients, especially those with an obstetrical injury, something like Botox might be a better option, as there's no long-term risk of fecal incontinence. I do have my references here, and I'd be happy to take any questions from the audience or the online forum.
That was excellent, Dr. Carr. Thank you. Really one of our superstar fellows. So, you know, this highlights some of the other things that we wanted to demonstrate in these 2 days. Number one, that a lot of the research that happens, a lot of the scholarly work that happens here is done by our trainees and done in collaboration with our trainees. They are the ones who are coming up with ideas and who are working through the ways to answer questions. And the second thing this highlights is, you know, another way to look at scholarly work. Here, this is a retrospective review of work that we're doing, and we're able to do this because we are a very high volume community center, and different from maybe a university center where they would have not see enough patients to be able to do this kind of a study. We're able to do it internally just with a small group. So again, the whole point is to demonstrate the different kinds of scholarly work that we do here at Swedish. Thank you, Dr. Carr. Are there questions in the audience for Dr. Carr? Dr. Carr, can you comment a little on how this compares to the literature and what other people have shown regarding Botox and sphincterotomy?
Yeah, the literature does support our findings that sphincterotomy is the most effective procedure, but there is the 5% risk of incontinence. And we did not evaluate incontinence with our data, but just from anecdotal evidence, I would say that our rate is less than 5% compared to the overall data. I don't know the exact data for the resolution with Botox, but I believe ours is a bit lower than the published data.
Yeah, typically about 65 to 80% cure rate with Botox, about 93% cure rate with sphincterotomy.
Mhm.
Published incontinence rates about 3% for sphincterotomy, higher but short term for Botox. So incontinence rates with Botox can be up to 25%, but self-limited. So in a couple months, you're going to be out in practice, and you're not going to have attendings to tell you what to do. What are you going to do for a 25-year-old woman comes in with an anal fissure? How are you going to assess her, and what are you going to do for her?
So I would start by performing my physical exam as well as a history to diagnose the fissure itself. And I would start with medical management, like we talked about. I would give her 4 to 6 weeks of nifedipine and lidocaine compound, and I would reevaluate her symptoms after that point. If she continued to have symptoms and had a fissure on exam, then I would discuss the 2 options with her. And for a young woman, has she had any obstetrical history?
Not yet, but she hopes to have triplets next year.
Oh, triplets. For that patient, I would strongly consider.
Really excited for triplets.
I would strongly consider Botox for that patient, with the understanding that there is a higher risk of failure. But knowing that she, is anticipating pregnancies and deliveries in the future, I think that would be a very safe option for her.
All right, very good. Any questions in the audience? Thank you, Dr. Carr. That was wonderful and great
Dr.
work, and
Gonzalez.
really continue to be one of our superstars.
Thank you.
Nice job. I've been told to make an announcement for those of you that are entering information and questions into the chat. Please put them in when you think of them, not at the end, because there's a little bit of a delay, and sometimes the questions are coming in when we're moved on already to the next presentation. So when you come up with your question, enter it, and we'll try to include it in the discussion at the time we're giving the presentation. So the fourth of our highlight presentations today, podium presentation, is being given. I'm not sure if it's Dr. Trong, Miss Huckabee, and Miss Lynch all together, or only one of them. Ms. Lynch is going to be presenting, and this is another aspect of the scholarly work that's happening at Swedish, looking at our impact on our community. And so this is, the whole, some of the things that we really wanted to demonstrate, and it's serendipitous that the best abstracts that were submitted highlight all the different things that we do here. So with that, Ms. Lynch, come on up.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Melita, and I'm joined here today by Tina Huckabee and Kayla Trang. Tina and I are both quality program managers with the Swedish Population Health Team, and Kayla is one of our clinical pharmacists. So I'll be presenting today on a proof of concept that our team conducted last year, and it's called Proof of Concept in Health Disparities, the Highs and Lows of Addressing Blood Pressure Control in the Black Population at Swedish Medical Group. And before I begin with the content, I want to take some time to acknowledge other members of the team who are involved in this work. Part of the population health work is to track and manage our CEI metrics. Tina and I both manage chronic disease measures, and this work is a culmination of the population health work and health equity work with support from the OHEDI team. Tina and I are fairly new to this team, and we're not actually involved in this initial proof of concept. But as we move forward, we'll be taking a lead on this work and continuing to expand it. But I do want to take a moment to say thank you to our executive sponsor, Physician Champion, our clinical pharmacist, and other members of our population health team. Okay, so for some background, this proof of concept was started because we found that national data and Swedish internal data show that Black patients often have lower rates of hypertension blood pressure control leading to worse cardiovascular outcomes and disparities in cardiovascular outcomes. Through research and a literature review, we also found that pharmacy-driven medication oversight and management has demonstrated improved rates of blood pressure control. With this background information and data, we identified a need to design a proof of concept to improve blood pressure outcomes for Black patients at Swedish. We also identified that through this process, it's necessary to better understand barriers and challenges patients face by involving and hearing from the patients themselves, and ultimately learning how to better support subpopulations that face health disparities in the context of our quality priorities. So for our methods, we conducted a pharmacy-led proof of concept. And for a little bit more context, a proof of concept is used to determine feasibility of an intervention. It is typically short-term, and based on the outcome of the proof of concept, we can either proceed, pivot, or stop. If we proceed, the next step is a trial where we develop a standard workflow and have measurable outcomes and expand to a few more test sites. From there, if the trial is a success, it moves to a pilot, which further expands the intervention to additional sites. And if that's successful, then the intervention is spread and implemented across all sites. So this proof of concept, the goal was to reach out to patients to help schedule an appointment with a pharmacist for medication management and education in hopes to improve blood pressure control. And so our study population included Black patients with hypertension, established with a primary care provider at our test clinics, and had a most recent blood pressure not in control. Exclusions included those who are in end-of-life care and stage renal disease, patients going through kidney transplants, pregnant patients, and then those in hospice. And our test locations were Edmonds Internal Medicine and Mill Creek Primary Care. These clinics were chosen because a proof of concept is supposed to be a small scale, and our intention was to reach no more than 20 patients. These clinics also had integrated clinical pharmacists, and at the time, the pharmacists had capacity to see additional patients. Once we had our target population and clinic sites, outreach was conducted by patient care coordinators who contacted patients to offer a visit with a pharmacist to manage their blood pressure. And now I will hand it over to Kayla, who will talk about results and outcomes and the interventions that we use in this proof of concept.
Good morning, everyone. So during the visit with the patient, we identify several barriers that you see on the screen here. So what you see on your left is the patient barrier, what we identify, including access to care. The patient doesn't have insurance, or the patient doesn't have financial cost to buy the medication that they needed. And we also identify health literacy issue, and the definition of health literacy is included in the bottom of the slide. So that including understanding the instruction of the physician, or understanding the instruction on the prescription, or even how to interpret the information that they will receive. And then we also identify barriers such as medication side effects, that patient not willing to continue taking their medication, or sometimes the patient not understanding how to order their refill and they ran out refills. Some of the patients also reported other barrier, including pandemic-related concern or anxiety that they receive it from work or at home, that causing them to have elevated blood pressure. So there were, as Melinda mentioned earlier, our proof of concept is a small number. Our goal is to complete 20 patients for this project. And by the end of this POC, we have 18 patients that we saw. And the result is that we're able to have 78% of the patients reach their blood pressure goal. So the intervention that we did during the visit, including like provide education. For example, showing patients how to take the medication, the kind of side effect that they might be anticipating, that they would not scare of taking them. And then also provide education of how to check the blood pressure at home, what blood pressure monitor to buy over the counter. And then we also identify opportunities that we can change therapy or add therapy to help manage the blood pressure. And I mentioned earlier, some patients have difficulty with understanding how to get the refill that they need. So then we would order refill for the patient. And finally, some of the issue that we identify is not related to medication, such as the anxiety and the pandemic concern that we mentioned earlier. So in that case, I would refer the patient to our other members of our integrated care team, like our behavioral health specialists, our care management, where they have the resources and the expertise that can help provide patient care. For the bottom of the slide, you are seeing the data from both internal medicine clinic and Mill Creek Primary Care Clinic. What you're seeing here is I saw 8 patients, but able to provide 10 patients with the education. And the reason because 2 of the patients declined the official pharmacist visit, but I was able to connect them over the phone and provide some education for them that they found that they were helpful. So by the end of the proof of concept, 78% of our patients at internal medicine clinic reached the blood pressure goal, and the goal as in less than 140 over 90. And then for the Mill Creek Clinic, we also have 80% of the patients that was able to reach the blood pressure goal. So in conclusion, one of our objectives is to identify the barriers that patients encounter that making it harder for them to manage their blood pressure. And 2 of the main barriers are the access to care and the health literacy. And from this proof of concept, we also seeing positive results from having supportive teams seeing the patient, and that including pharmacist visit or visit from other care member of the integrated care team as well. And we're hoping moving forward that we're able to continue to closing the health disparity gap and able to improve health equity. So next, Melita would go over what is the next step for our team.
Thank you, Kayla. So for our next steps in moving forward, through the success of this proof of concept, this has now actually moved to the trial phase. And it will be expanding to all locations with embedded pharmacists, including Ballard Primary Care, Edmonds Internal Medicine, Issaquah Primary Care, West Seattle Internal Medicine, and West Seattle Primary Care. This trial will hopefully begin soon. We had intended for it to start in April, so it should be starting in a few more weeks. And as we continue this work, we want to continue to explore using other members of the integrated care team to provide this kind of patient-centered support. And we are also currently starting a trial for blood pressure management among Black patients at different clinics using our care management team. And as we continue this work, it's imperative that we prioritize and support patient engagement, health literacy, and integrated care team support. Thank you, and I will now open for any questions.
Thank you. That was wonderful. You know, this is how Swedish really distinguishes itself. It's reaching out to the community to help our patients where they are. Are there any questions in the audience? Dr. Carr.
Thank you for your presentation. I think it's really important for patients to have such a group of a care team. I think it really helps, kind of cover all the aspects of their care. But I was curious if someone was in a primary care clinic that didn't have all of the support that a large system like Swedish or Providence has, what kind of things do you think would be helpful for a primary care provider to provide to these patients to help ensure compliance and to reach those blood pressure goals?
I'll defer this question to Kayla.
This is, thank you for the question. So this is also one of the difficulty that we encounter at the Swedish Primary Care Clinic as well, because not all the clinic have an embedded clinical pharmacist. So we offer an e-consult services for the pharmacy that the providers who do not have a clinical pharmacist on site who can also reach out to us and we can provide recommendation. And I anticipate that that is something that could be applied to other health systems as well. When we don't have the people resources, then the e-consult will be something that able to help. And then we also, our care management and our nurse also provided resource that physician can print out for patient. So it's not require direct contact, but also resource available online that we can provide to patient too.
There's a question in the chat that asks, in addition to medications, were lifestyle changes, diet, exercise also part of the intervention beyond medication?
I'm sorry, can you repeat? Is the diet and exercise, is the
In
additional?
addition to medications, were lifestyle changes, diet and exercise also part of the intervention beyond medications?
Yes, so the patient education I mentioned in the slide, that including talking about medication as well as talking to patients about diet and physical activity, because I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't have the like able to provide like detailed instruction for patient. So oftentimes I would provide the basic information, and when I find that patient have interest about lifestyle modification, then we will send referral to our nutritionist, our dietitian, and they have been a big help for us as well.
This is excellent work. Thank you very much. And we do know that there are health disparities for the population most at risk for hypertension. My question is, how scalable is this project? It sounds like it's quite intensive from a personnel standpoint. Are there technological tools that we can bring to help to scale this to our greater population?
So that is definitely could work for the proof of concept. Our number is small, and giving the workflow part, the issue is not that the clinical pharmacist team does not have the capacity to see the patient. It also involves like the workflow of having patient care coordinator reach out to patients and schedule the appointment. And so overall, we're hoping that we're able to expand it system-wise, and we're also including team that have like care management or even using our nurse in the clinic who can help with the official visit, clinical visit, that are able to provide assistance to patient as well.
Are there more questions in the audience? Yes.
With getting like care coordination involved, and this would be for like your primary offices as well as hospitals, is there any partnerships with like with pharmacies to help with maybe the people that can't go out to the pharmacy to pick up their medication, like have it delivered to them and facilitate that for them? Because that's a pretty big one, just getting, like you said, getting the refills and stuff, but actually getting them to the pharmacy to pick it up. Is that something that's also kind of in that you guys have thought of?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the challenges that some of our patients encounter of getting the medication. Typically, we work with some of the mail delivering pharmacy or the pharmacy that do bubble pack, and we talk with them ahead of time. And when we refer patient to them, they kind of like able to help out the patient. I even have some of one of the clinical pharmacists have the medication delivered to a homeless patient who lived under the West Seattle Bridge. So there was no home, and the pharmacy was willing to like bring it to the patient. So it's involve a big team with like the community pharmacy help as well.
There's one more question from the chat that's asking what modalities you're using to assess health literacy.
Very good question. So we use the public article available talking about the definition of health literacy, and also based on our clinical experience. Most of the time, this is what for the proof of concept, when the patient come into the visit, they are sharing with us the barriers that they encounter. And from there, we group this barrier as like how confident with learning or health literacy issue. And that's how we come up with the definition for this.
Well, thank you very much. That's really good work, and I look forward to seeing it scaled across our system and hopefully as a model for other systems as well. Congratulations.
Thank you.
With that, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back at 11 o'clock with the next portion of our presentations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Can y'all hear us? That's a little bit loud. All right. So hi, we're going to go ahead and get started. It has been such a pleasure to listen to the podium presentations before this. So if folks are joining us late, I highly encourage you to listen to them because they're absolutely amazing. Some great work, great studies. Renee and I are here to talk to you about quality and quality improvement. So I am Karen Larson-Pollock. I am the Chief Quality Officer of the Puget Sound region, but have been up at Prov Everett for about 10 years, but my husband works for Swedish. So we actually have seen both sides. I was talking earlier, both sides of how the two organizations work together. And I've just been so impressed with Swedish. And something is beeping. Can y'all hear that? Is it the mic? Okay. The mic is beeping, so I'm going to turn it over to Renee to introduce herself. Well, maybe I give you the mic.
Absolutely. My name is Renee Rislier-Bomers. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer at Cherry Hill Campus and interim CNO for Puget Sound Central. I've been at Swedish for 20 years and have had a multitude of roles, including in education. And so this type of event has been incredibly important to me because with the work that we've done in research and in quality improvement, and then my previous role as CQO prior to my transition, and then of course welcoming Karen into the fold, it was just so evident that we do a lot of great work, and celebrating it and disseminating it collectively is such a gift. And so really appreciate the opportunity to present today and to share a little bit more about quality improvement here at our organization and throughout the region.
All right, I'm going to move us away from the coffee break slide. So that's our little alphabet soup with our names down below, and I'm just going to go on the record for both of us. If anybody has any questions or wants to contact us afterwards for anything, even if it's career advice or more information about quality, feel free to reach out to us. We're both in the Global Outlook. All right, so our learning objectives today. So we're going to start with the learning part, and then we're going to get to the celebration part. So the learning part, we'll talk about the fundamentals of quality and process improvement, because nobody really tells people exactly what this looks like. So we'll highlight for you what that is. We'll talk about improvement models, how they're different, how they're alike, and then some of the common tools that are used in the models. We'll see and celebrate some of the most amazing things. As I've been in this role now almost 3 months, I've toured a variety, actually all campuses, and have really just been so impressed with the staff and the daily management systems and the celebrations that are done around quality. So we'll talk about that and show you some great pictures. We'll talk about the importance of a safety culture and how that quality improvement is such a key fundamental for part of that. And then I'm going to introduce a concept that we did up north, up at Prov Everett, called value stream management. And it's a way to take daily management systems and go maybe one step above. So we'll leave you with a little teaser on how we can work even more between teams. All right, so hopefully folks have seen this. So this is in our high reliability or caring reliably training. It's that Swiss cheese effect, right, on the top part of the slide. And so where there are humans, there are human error. That is just by nature what we do. And so it's so important for each of us to really build the systems and structures to put barriers in place between our actions and active errors reaching the patient. And we call it the Swiss cheese effect, right? So those barriers can be technology, they can be people, they can be processes, et cetera. But they're really to put those guardrails in place to prevent errors from happening and reaching the patient. But we know sometimes they do, right? And that's why quality improvement is such a key to really a safety culture and how we treat our patients. So right-hand side, quality improvement is so important around detecting and correcting the errors, right? So if they reach the patient, we use quality improvement to identify what happened, find the root causes of really what the issue was, how are the systems and structures challenged in preventing those errors. But it also where we want to go is using quality improvement to prevent the errors, right? Before the harm gets to the patient, how do we catch them? And Renee will talk about good catches. And that's such an important part of quality improvement is moving upstream before harm even happens. And so when we talk about quality improvement, there's really 4 fundamentals when we look at that. The first is really having systems thinking, but focusing on something called microsystems. And we'll talk in depth about systems thinking, about how you work in between departments and teams. But we know that a lot of the improvement work that we do is in the microsystem level. And think of that as work teams or departments. That's where a lot of the PDSAs, and I'll explain that, that happens. So it's important to have great systems and structures within your microsystem in your department, but also everybody really thinking about how the patient flows through your system and how do you work and improve the interrelated parts of their flow through the system. It's important to understand the improvement cycle and how to implement that. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about something called PDSA and what that means, because a lot of folks will call it PDSA cycles. Improvement models, there's a lot out there. There's probably 3 that are most common for healthcare. So we'll walk you through what those are, how they're alike and how they differ. And then we'll talk about some quality improvement tools that are used with all of them. All right, so systems thinking, the best way to think about systems thinking is imagine, who's rowed in a boat with somebody else? Anybody? Okay. So you know if you're not rowing together and rowing in sync, you pretty much either turn around or you go nowhere, right? And so systems thinking is really, are all the rowers and all the rows working in your boat going in the same direction at the same pace? Are you working together to get to your destination? And that's why it's so important, because you can move faster and you can move better if you're all working together. So that requires the good tools, the right people, and the right communication. But on the right-hand side, there's a quote by Deming, who worked on one of these improvement models. We'll talk about that. He worked with Toyota. And he's a systems thinker, and he has 2 great quotes that I absolutely love. And it's, every system is specifically designed to get the results that it gets. And when you think about it, we get what we design, right? So that's important. And a bad system will be a good person any day. And so it's really important to look at your systems and your structures, because that is what will impact your quality of care. And so when we think about systems thinking, it's so important to understand the entire system and how those linkages work. And often that's where we see those gaps between our care and the pain points that the patients and their families see. And it's really important to really understand the patient's experience by coming and looking at it from their view, right? As they view through the system, they expect us to be seamless. So bringing that eye of the patient as you think about systems thinking. So the improvement cycle, so we call this the PDSA cycle. This is used in a variety of the models in different ways, sometimes called differently, but PDSA seems to stick. And it's pretty simple. It's plan, do, study, and act. And I was just talking before here about most clinicians do this all the time in what you do. You do something, it may or may not work, you think about it, and you may modify your workflow or whatever you've done with a particular patient. And so it's really a way to break down your improvement cycle into 4 different parts. And the key to this is hopefully, we call it fail forward and fast, right? So this doesn't mean that we don't want failure. Actually, if you're not failing, you're not trying, to be perfectly honest. So failure is okay, as long as you stop and you think and you learn from that failure, you improve what you're doing, and hopefully you fail forward. And so you learn fast, you implement fast, and you keep on iterating and keep on learning. That's what the PDSA cycle is all about. It's not about perfection. It's about really learning and trialing to try to get to improvement. And so when we think about improvement models, there are probably 6 different, maybe is that 6 on there? Yeah, 6 different fundamental characteristics around improvement models. The first one for me absolutely is leadership to hold people accountable, and it needs to start from the top, right? From your CEO, your C-suite, all the way down. Your leadership has to support, has to be a part of it. And it's also about kind accountability, right? We've got to have people accountable for what they're planning to do and what they're doing around improvement. But leadership is absolutely critical. Stakeholders are participants. It is so key to have frontline caregivers part of identifying the root causes, part of identifying and designing what the changes could be, and really understanding about improvement. Care is at the front lines. It can't be done by a bunch of people in a room, in a basement, who aren't out on the floors. And so quality is everyone's job. The third one is measurement and analysis. So some way to look at how you're doing, look at how you're doing and analyzing that, and then improving from that. So data is important, and sometimes data, and we'll show you, can be stickers on a paper chart. It doesn't have to be kind of techie and glam all the time. It's the data that matters, and that's important. You need a structure and a process to test. So we talked about PDSA. You need a way to be able to monitor and track it and hopefully sustain it. And it's really important to talk and make sure that everybody has transparent and understandable metrics all the way down. And I'll show you a tool that we use in the North called a metrics cascade, but it is really making sure that everybody at every level has a metric that matters to them. And there's 3 different types of models that in general are used in healthcare. So I'll start on the left-hand side. So lean, and again, lean and Six Sigma actually were both designed in manufacturing and then brought over to healthcare. So lean started with Toyota. That was that Deming that I talked about, who was that systems thinker. And it was really focused around waste. That's the big focus on lean. And they really want to provide value to the customer by eliminating the waste that's in the system. And that waste can be your time, it could be wasted steps, it could be wasted cost, but it's that waste in whatever system you have. And there's some terminology that's within lean that we use, value stream mapping. I'll show you that. It's a way to map between systems from the patient's perspective. But something like 5S, people oftentimes talk about that. And that's basically there's 5 S's in a process to clean up the waste in maybe a waste of motion in a system. So think about things like when you do, you look at your supply closets and your inventory. How do you look at the inventory? How do you make it standardized? How do you sustain it, etc. So 5S is just a way to eliminate waste in a particular system. The middle one is Six Sigma. So folks may have heard of this, again, from a manufacturing organization. This time it was GE. And this is really focused on eliminating errors. And there's a lot around statistics on this one. And so, again, it's a lot more on the math and the stats associated with this. And so Sigma's a standard deviation. It's your variation in your process. And so they really focus on going down to the 6th place, if you will, in your variation, so that, if you will, 99.999, did I get that number? Yeah, 66. So of all production opportunities are free of defects. So you really are eliminating defects down to the nth degree. That's the big focus of Six Sigma. And then they use something called DIMAIC, which is really a framework for which it's in essence the way of saying like a PDSA. So you design, you measure, you analyze, you implement. So it's their framework on how they set up their improvement projects. And then on the right-hand side is newer. So Lean and Six Sigma have been around for decades. IHI is an organization, it's a think tank out of Boston. It's the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And they use the science of improvement, but they really bring in the fact that they want to bring in frontline caregivers. And maybe it's not all about the statistics, et cetera. Maybe it's about just improvement. So I tend to like the IHI model in that it focuses, and you can see on the sort of the green pyramid at the top, it really starts with what are we trying to accomplish, and you spend more time on that. Really, like, let's make sure we're all clear on what we want to accomplish. And then how do we know change is an improvement? Because not all change is good. And so it's really making sure you spend time to identify, what do we want to do? Is that the right change? How do we know it's an improvement? And then as we look at this, what changes can we make that would result in that improvement? So it's really getting granular about that, and then what changes you can trial. And then they do the PDSA cycle, and you just PDSA, PDSA, PDSA. So all are great models. Many different organizations use different ones of them, but we've seen more of Lean and IHI, I think, more recently, as we get more and more caregivers involved in the front lines, or from the front lines. And then lastly, improvement tools and techniques. So this is just a few that we use. I'll start on the right-hand side because I saw a lot of these as I've been walking around and seeing daily management systems or SMS boards on the units. The right-hand side is called a Pareto chart. And it's one of the easiest ways to start even trying to get your eyes around or brain around what are the causes of when we're missing something, right? What are the causes of error? And it's in essence, you just start tracking it and you start categorizing kind of what those misses are, and you track them out. It's like the 80-20 rule. And you look at the categories and you focus on the category first that has the most number of misses. So it's called a Pareto chart, and you just kind of work your way down from the most common misses and reasons for that all the way down backwards. The middle one's called a fishbone diagram, and I like that one in that if you kind of look on the right-hand side where that blue box is, it's like the mouth of a fish, right? And you start with that problem statement. So what's the problem? You don't solutionize, which is, we tend to try to like to do that in healthcare. You really start, what is that key fundamental problem that we are seeing? And then you work your way left. And as you work your way left, you start think about what are the root causes of that, and you keep on asking why. Why would that be? Why would that be? Why would that be? And you can see for this example, we have a problem statement, and then you can see the scales coming out on the upper and lower, and you bucket those errors in categories. Things like it's an environmental cause, or it's an equipment or supplies or staff or people. So it's a way to take a problem statement, ask why and get to the root cause, and then start to categorize where your problems are all the way down to your root, which is your primary cause for an issue. So that's a fishbone diagram. There's a couple other terms for it, but that is in essence what is used. A lot of times when we look at for patient safety and big misses, we'll use that fishbone diagram. And then the 5 whys on the left-hand side is just a great technique that is often used with the fishbone diagram or with Pareto. And in essence, it says, what's the problem? And you ask why 5 times. And you really have to, it gets tough on the 4th or 5th, but it really makes you think about what those root causes are. So very simple way to use, just kind of asking probing questions to then middle, determine where your errors are, or on the right-hand side, just even where you start in terms of the big buckets. So those are just some 3 common tools that we oftentimes see in process improvement. And then I'll leave you with this. So why the focus on waste, especially most recently? And I love this graphic. So in essence, the bottom part where you see there's kind of a tan, that is if healthcare expenditures grew at the rate of our gross domestic product, right? So the value of the goods and services over a time period for an economy, if it grew at that same rate that our goods and services elsewhere grew, it'd be flat, right? And then as you look at kind of the blue all the way up to the teal, it is what is the estimate of all of the causes of waste that are adding to the cost of healthcare? And you can see it's exponential, right? So starting from the top, failures of care delivery could be wrong side of care, right? Maybe they didn't have to come to the hospital. Maybe they should have gone elsewhere. Failures of care coordination. How are we moving these people through the systems? Over treatment, right? Antibiotics when we don't need it. CT or MRI when we don't need it. Somebody who hasn't had a goals of care conversation, who is at end stage of life, and they're in the ICU when probably actually hospice might have been their choice. So that's considered overtreatment as well. And then administrative complexity, if anybody's seen, I know we all deal with it, insurance company, regulations, governmental complexity, we've made a very complex healthcare system here, and navigating that healthcare system, there's lots of waste associated with that. So when you add those up, that's why waste and that focus on waste with those models has been so embraced by healthcare, because we've got a lot of opportunity and we know it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Renee.
So when we look at quality, it's really important to understand that we have frameworks, we have tools, but how do we have it in action? And it's so important for us to figure out how we measure it, how we employ it, and what are our outcomes. For those who know me well, I love Donna Bedian, and Donna Bedian is structure, process, outcomes. And for much of the discussion that Karin had started with how we can explore quality using those tools and those frameworks, if we don't have a solid structure of how we do that in our daily activities, we won't see the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And so here's our Swedish management system. And we referenced that earlier as the daily management system. And it's an opportunity for us to build a structure, a quite active, visible, I would say a breathing and living structure within an organization that ensures that we're embedding quality improvement activities. And there are 6 key components to the Swedish management system. One is goal setting. We need to know what our true north is. We need to know what our priorities. And I think we can all pretty much say that our plates are fairly full. They're overflowing. And if we look at the list of priorities that we have within our own community, whether it's our units, our provider practice, we have so much that we have to keep track of. It can be very disorienting. So having those true north statements, being able to also identify what our key critical goals are for the time period, making sure our key performance indicators, so what are we measuring and what are we being held accountable to, is distinct and clear. And having those action plans delineated is really important. And so much of what we do organizationally with our SMS boards is bringing visibility to what our goals are. In addition, the second key component is visual performance, actually being able to see what is important, what are our goals, what's the work that we're doing, and what are those outcomes. And so performance boards, the SMS boards that are on many of our units and departments that we've been rolling out the last year and a half, has been one of the key aspects. How do we go on a unit and collectively as a team be able to huddle around a board and understand what our priorities are and what's the work to do. The huddle boards have our scorecards. They also have, recognition about what we're doing well on. And then likewise measuring aspects of areas that we need to improve. And so we'll provide a little bit more detail on the visual piece of the SMS board, but making sure that you have some component that is transparent and shareable. The third is daily improvement. So having a process. So if we have a structure in place where we're bringing visibility and we have our goals in place, but we have no mechanism of being able to share that information with others or to be able to escalate concerns, then we fail. We won't know what we need to PDSA on. We don't know what we need to submit. We've got EQVRs and many other mechanisms that are a part of this process. But having an escalation pathway daily to improve it is critical. And so for us at Swedish, our daily huddles, being able to huddle at a change of shifts, particularly with the team, identify if overnight or during the day there's been any issues and concerns, and then having a mechanism of doing something with that information. So how do we inform our core leaders? How do they escalate through the chain of command? And so we utilize tiered escalations. We have a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and a tier 4, which allows us to escalate concerns in the day quickly and efficiently to allow us to prioritize what needs attention. It also brings visibility to a lot of interdisciplinary teams, IT, environmental services, supply chain, and others who might not necessarily be actively looking at a ticket that you submitted that morning, but who could get pinged on the tiered huddle to say, oh, a ticket's been submitted. This is an issue and a safety concern. I need to prioritize that during my day and address it. And then standardized work, being able to build a process in which the work that we do has some standardization. And I do strongly believe in standardization, but from a hybrid perspective. There's also needs to be able to make adjustments that make sense for the patient, for our caregivers, and for the environment by which we're working. The fourth piece of the SMS board is problem solving. And it's critical to get the voice of our stakeholders. And with that, whether it's idea cards, what matters to you, getting the mechanisms of information on problems that we see, that's how often we understand what we need to PDSA, and often how we more proactively understand issues with the Swiss cheese effect. We don't want harm to impact our patient and then us decide, oh, we've got a problem, let's now investigate it and employ these improvement models. We would rather say, hey, I see that there's a potential risk here. I've got an idea of how we can do this better. So we catch it more proactively on that tail end. Another piece of problem solving is having leadership support, and part of the feature is a leadership accountability. And to be accountable, we have to also be visible and active and participative, and that is also included in our rounding. And so many of the campus have leadership rounding. We'll be changing that coming up this month, so we're rounding not only during a set time during the day and the week, but actually during change of shift huddles around the SMS board. So we have the opportunity to learn more from the team and to hear from the team directly about the rocks in folks' shoes. And then, of course, problem solving includes the use of the process improvement tools that Karin described. And for Swedish, we've seen definitely a variation. We often will employ the fishbone one. That's a very popular one. But how do we have the process improvement tools available at our fingertips so that we can problem solve collectively? The fifth, what we still need to improve on is closing the loop. So with any system, it's great to have an inform, to have direction, and to be solution oriented. But if we don't have a mechanism of closing the loop and communicating back what we have discovered and found, that can be very frustrating. And I would say one of the biggest things that we've heard from our caregivers is, I submit an EQVR, I submit a request, and I don't hear back. And so being able to build up processes by which we're communicating what we find and what we can share, and alerting folks that we do have our attention on that work. We've employed spotlight reports in several different venues. Many units have taken it more locally, where they've been able to build spreadsheets of project ideas and concerns and be able to track it with the red, yellow, and green. Likewise, we do that with our tiered huddles. What are things on the action register that we have a concern with? Is there a leak in a room? Was there a patient safety concern? Who is responsible for follow-up? Are we red on it? Are we green? Do we need to break down some barriers? Roundtables. One of the great opportunities, and I had the fortunate opportunity on Monday to have a roundtable with our Cherry Hill caregivers, is to connect and to be able to share what we're doing, in addition to using that as a venue of hearing from caregivers on ideas. So that connects very closely with number 4. But again, having those roundtables with key folks to understand how we can do better, and other forums like these type of opportunities to share. And then finally, best practice sharing is really important. And being Swedish and the 5 campuses historically, and now growing into Puget Sound region, where we're 8 campuses, 2 ACCs, and hundreds of clinics, how do we share that information of best practices? This is a great example of how we can share this information through research and quality improvement and quality work and disseminating that, but then also on a daily, more regular basis, how do we share that information? So that could be through many of our practice councils, how we connect with interdisciplinary teams among a multitude of folks, many of our clinical nurse specialists, professional development specialists, and caregiver leaders sit also at enterprise level practice groups within the system so that we can learn from each other, that we can see that Oregon or California or Texas might be doing something really innovative and improving in a certain area where we're struggling with, and how can we learn? And conversely, how do we share that information with them? Shared leadership. I think one of the biggest challenges that we've had with COVID is not being together, and that also is inclusive of our shared leadership councils. And some campuses have been able to maintain their shared leadership councils in an electronic virtual format, which is great. But the focus moving forward is really how do we re-engage with those shared leadership groups so that we've got bedside caregivers being able to share in the decision making and problem solving as well. And then lateral deployment. How are we ensuring that we're making the connection between collective similar teams across a multitude of campus areas? And that could be beyond the practice councils, but having those communication venues, share sites, teams. Technology has definitely given us many advantages for information sharing. And so if we can take anything from this pandemic, is being able to do so. So how does daily management systems work, and what are some of the key features of that? It has to be accessible. And for our Swedish management system boards, or SMS boards, having it visually and accessibly free in an area and environmentally is very hard on our units. We don't have a lot of space. We're often competing for space. But finding a location where you can share that information that people can reach. What is hard too is how to make that, you need the more local, in-person accessibility, but then how do you virtualize that? And I think that's our next step, is how do we take SMS boards and be able to share that amongst other teams and departments if you're not on site or in person. But accessibility is very important. It also needs to create an environment of transparency. We need to be comfortable including information on there that we want to share transparently with our teams. We need to be okay with indicating if there's a patient safety or a quality concern that we're worried about. We need to be comfortable posting our metrics and that we're not hiding information. And so really creating that transparency so we're all on the same page and that we have that available is truly important. Another key system that's important for this to work is it gives a shared understanding of problems, the causes, and the solutions. So when we look at our SMS board, some of the features that are included in is not only identifying the issue or our objective, but being able to use a Pareto chart to be able to measure when we don't meet that expectation. So for example, if we're trying to measure that we're going to employ a bundle, or that every one of our patients are going to get their CHG back, whatever it might be, being able to measure that and visibly say, this is our goal. we're going to do this, how many, is it every 12 hours? Is it once a shift? Is it once a day? So having very clear delineation. And then if it doesn't happen and it turns red, no penalty, no shame, but that we identify on the Pareto chart the reason and the rationale why we didn't achieve it, so that we can then be more solution oriented. It helps us get to those root causes by data collecting versus saying, well, we've completed it 50% of the time. We quite don't know why. It's probably because we're busy. And we very well may have been busy, but when we actually ask the whys behind it and dig in deep and track it, we'll understand the root cause that much more. It also highlights opportunities. So SMS and the management system allows us to understand and look at our data points and see where we're not performing well and where there's opportunity. And with the daily management of being able to evaluate those process measures, meaning what are we measuring for those 4 indicators, it gives us a sense of whether or not we're achieving or if we're not hitting that mark. And so if we're constantly in the red and we're not able to maintain that for 21 days, it gives us quite visibly information of where we need to continue working. The continuous learning and improvement embeds desired safety behaviors into daily work. This is critical. What I've noticed with quality, and when I was in my CQO role and prior my education role and now a CNO, is that we are very busy human beings. There's a lot of work that we do and a lot of asks. And it's hard as a human being to be able to manage that when you have to prioritize patient care and your day-to-day job. So building it into a structure by which we're simplifying and identifying very readily what the work is, and then also making it more routine. It becomes habit forming. When we do it routinely and we know what we're measuring for a period of time, it brings it to the forefront and we tend to stick with it a lot better. In addition, what I find at Swedish too is we employ something, we roll it out, and then 3 months later, it's not sticking. And we don't measure and go back necessarily. So with SMS, this also allows us to say, hey, we achieved our goal. We did really well. We're going to put a new goal up. But in 3 months, 6 months, let's bring it back. Let's track it for a week. Let's see how we're doing with our CHG baths or whatever we're trying to measure. And then if we find we're in the green and we're meeting those metrics, great, it's done. We're doing well. But then if we're in the red again, obviously we didn't build in the habit. There's other barriers perhaps. Maybe we don't have the equipment, we don't have the wipes, it's not clear in the policy. And then we can again mitigate, PDSA it, and move forward and fail fast. And then motivating change when we see the gaps between what we want and what we're doing. It's so hard when we have goals not to necessarily know what the process measures are for us to have that success. And with SMS, it gives us very tangential, very connected ways that we can then do that work and identify how our practice is improving. When I did my research on CAUTI prevention many years ago, one of the hardest pieces with CAUTIs was we didn't see the patient sick with the CAUTI when we were doing the cares that would impact that many days later. We don't necessarily see the outcomes as we do if we did the wrong site, surgical site, if we made an error giving a medication that had side effects that reacted really quickly. There's much of our work that we do that we don't see the consequences very quickly. And so having process measures of connecting the why between why is it important that I'm doing this work and why am I measuring it and how do I see those outcomes over a period of time is incredibly helpful, especially for those hard situations where we don't necessarily connect the cause and effect as quickly. So here's SMS in action, and I love pictures. And these are 2 of our areas at Cherry Hill campus. And the management system needs to move it to our stakeholders. So again, you'll see the SMS boards out in the community, out in the unit, out in our departments and teams where our people are there. And that's where we find that once you employ that, we've seen much more adoption and rapid improvement in our quality metrics. Particularly when we get a blip, whether it's in CAUTI, CLABSIs, falls, HAPIs, or other safety indicators, that if we incorporate things visibly on SMS, we're huddling, we're talking about it, we see incredible improvement more quickly than when we're working it on the background with action plans, with the team in the basement, trying to understand what's going on. And here are some more boards. So it's not just at Cherry Hill. Cherry Hill was one of the first campuses to employ the SMS boards, but we do have it on all our campuses. And they are variable, but they're standard. So there's features you can see where we have elements of the SMS board that are key. We've got our goals. So again, having that goal visibility. We have our top 5. What are the 5 most important things that we on our unit are identifying? And again, it brings in that involvement of the team to be able to articulate that. Then we have our top 4 measurables. What are we measuring? What are the process improvement pieces that we want to be able to track every single day or every single shift? And with that, having color coding, whether it's a pen or a sticker to say, yes, we achieved it today, or no, we didn't. And then a Pareto chart on the side, being able to say, when we didn't achieve it, what was the reason why? And that, again, fundamentally feeds back into our ability to understand root causes and to make modifications so that we can see more readily improvement. So just some great examples from all our campuses. This is inclusive of our First Hill, Edmonds, Ballard, and First Hill teams. In addition to our SMS boards is a section, and this is when I round, this is one of the first places I look, is the voice of our caregivers. This allows us to understand, again, what are the ideas? It's kind of an idea board there and an ability to alert not only ideas, but concerns. And so there's usually a new working and solved section, again, very simplified and color coordinated. And then you are able to post pretty quickly. You just write it down, what your concern is or what your idea is, and you put in the new. And then during rounding, when core leaders and the team are looking at that, they can evaluate it, and either they manage it, they can put in the working pile and they can locally work on it, or if they need to escalate it. Maybe it's a safety concern that the manager can't necessarily solve in that moment because it is a system issue. This then feeds in the tiered huddle system to be able to escalate it on tier 3 and then on tier 4 to get faster barriers to be broken or resources allocated. And then of course solved. And the solved is great because it's that feedback loop of making sure that we're connecting the dots, allowing our caregivers to know that we did, maybe we were able to resolve it. Maybe it was a hardline no. It was something that we tried to do. We don't have the resources right now, but it provides the ability to communicate that with an explanation why. And for many units, they've taken then that and put it on stoplight reports so that we can track and watch more closely the issues that we've had, our resolutions, and those that are still open. What I also love too is getting voices beyond just the idea, but consensus from a unit on whether or not it's a popular idea. And you'll see that people do it differently. There's paper clips, there's other little clippies that folks will put on. And so if something resonates with you, you're able to say, yeah, this is a hot topic item. And be able to indicate that. So for leadership, when we're rounding, we can say, wow, you know, the concern about staffing on night shift, or the concern about not having enough walkers for our patients upon discharge, that is a hot topic. Many of our staff members are indicating through the clips or otherwise that this is an issue, and so we need to make sure that we prioritize that. So here's a picture of an example. So another key element of SMS. So part of the SMS board is embedding this within a safety culture and caring reliably is what we tote here at Swedish. And building the safety culture, particularly with what we're realizing over the years through the work of IHI, in addition to what we're also seeing and experiencing with the Redonda VOD case, where it is so important for us to be able to speak up and speak up without penalty and acknowledging that there's system issues, but there's also personal accountability. And that's a highly complex case, but how do we preserve a safety culture where we feel comfortable and transparent to be able to share this information? And so building that requires these 4 elements. And I would say if you look at the far right, the patient, caregiver, and provider safety, that is the culmination. That's our outcome, protecting people from harm. And that's not just of our patients, that's also of us as physicians, as nurses, as other care and clinicians, because there's often many victims when it comes to patient safety events. There's the victim of the patient themselves, but then the caregiver involved in that. And we all have our stories. I have my story where we've had an error occur and there's harm, and we remember those. They do make a mark on our careers. And so with that, what feeds into that is high reliability. So it's how do we religiously, reliably have behavior shaping factors reduce human behavior? What are the behaviors that we need to make sure that we are consistent? And these are often the checklist, the drilled in the 5 rights. Like, what are the pieces and elements in our behavior that is so important for us to ensure that we don't have concerns and harm? But we can have a great process, but culture can kill that pretty quickly. We need to have a culture where we are able to communicate, hold the line, speak up for safety. And I hope you get a little badge here. Here's just a little promotional blip. Get your pin to speak up for safety. Because if you don't feel comfortable to be able to speak up in the moment, then the process and the elements of high reliability falter. And there's a lot of contributors to culture. And what I would say with this pandemic and with our staffing turnover, we're working with different team members. We're working with folks that we haven't seen before and met. And whenever we have an influx of new teams and building that culture and that relationship is delayed and it's hard. And so I know with that, there's a lot of great work that our leaders, our caregivers are doing in that space. And I think that we still have a lot of opportunity. The third element is human error prevention. So that is really looking at the Swiss cheese effect and building systems and processes using technology, using equipment, using safety checks to ensure that human errors are prevented versus putting the onus purely on the person to say, well, this is best practice, you have to achieve it every time. We have to think like a human being. If we're distracted, if we are not familiar in this area, what are the other elements that are really key and important so we can prevent human error? How do we simplify and make it easier? How do we add information from our policies and procedures and make it more accessible? And especially with the complexity of our system, that has been challenging. We've gone to a new Epic system. It seems like we have new equipment every, few months and few years. And so there's a learning curve with that. So how do we continually look at the systems and processes to improve that so errors are not made? So going back to culture a bit, culture is really key, and the ability for the team to connect and efficiently achieve their goals. And I believe the SMS board really culminates that. It allows the team to huddle and to identify what those shared experiences are, and the team has to buy it. And in order to buy in, you have to have a culture where you want to speak about it. And so the importance of culture is really at the center of it all. The culture helps you not only with problem solving and standardizing work compliance, being able to call someone out and say, hey, that's not best practice, did you wash your hands? Without any fear of impact. And having that trust in that relationship will allow you to do that. In addition to being able to speak up and say, I think I could have made an error. And I want to share that with the team and learn from it and have transparency about it. That's where continuous improvement comes along. So again, culture truly is important. So what does a safety culture really look like? You have to think that safety is important. And when we went through our exercise of looking at our mission, vision, and values many years ago, one of the key fundamental differences in our values are the same, but it has an additional value, safety. Safety has to be important. And we need to think it, we need to believe it, and we need to make it a priority. We have to have the knowledge and skills to perform tasks with high reliability. And so for a safety culture, being able to have orientation, training, and experiences to allow our folks to have the knowledge to perform the tasks in the same way, in the same manner, with the same resources is important. If we've seen anything with staffing and with our current workforce, is that has definitely been challenged. So making sure, how do we support our teams with that? And I'm excited working with the clinical education and practice team is being able to, and we're doing a survey, is being able to go back to our frontline staff and our unit managers and our core leaders and say, okay, we've been through a lot of trauma with the pandemic. We're still doing a lot of great work. What are the skills? What's the knowledge that we need to continue to to focus on in this upcoming year, and how do we bring that to the bedside? We have to be mindful to anticipate harm. We have to have vigilance around it. We need to make sure that we're in all our actions that we're anticipating that there could be a scenario where harm occurs so that our safety behaviors are employed and we don't become cavalier, which is so hard when we're exhausted, and I recognize that. We have to be resilient to take action to prevent harm. And that kind of speaks to that previous comment that I made. We are exhausted. Folks are morally distressed. And when you look at the Redonda Vaught case, she was precepting, she was in a new care area, it was busy, staffing was challenging. So there were circumstances there. So how do we build in resiliency in addition to system protection to prevent those errors from occurring? And working in systems that support high reliability. An organization that talks about high reliability, that does process improvement, builds a safety culture, because if you're really working towards high reliability, your outcome will be better safety outcomes for both our patients and our caregivers. And transparent with failures. It really happens here. The SBARs that our patient safety officers send out every single month about when an incident occurs. And how do we translate that to the multitude of campuses that are part of our system? But being okay to be able to share our case. And we've had clinicians have very traumatizing patient safety harm events, be able to come to an auditorium or virtually share what occurred, what they learned, and what we're doing to improve in the future. So part of culture safety and improvement focus is being able to have the Golden Zero Award, so celebrating. And so this is, again, I love pictures. So the Golden Zero Award was developed in partnership with our infection prevention team. And it was really looking at not only how are we performing with our CAUTIs, CLABSIs, and these outcomes, and if we achieve 0 events over a period of time, you get recognition. But also reflecting that these are also teams that are employing this in their safety huddles, in their SMS boards. They've got a lot of strategy that has allowed them to be a golden zero. So incorporating that, having that visible, and reminding folks of why we're here and why it's important. And then the Good Catch Award. So speaking up for safety, identifying proactively versus after an event occurs, being able to use the idea board or mentioning it on the SMS of if you have an idea of what could have gone wrong. Good Catch Awards recognizes those. It recognizes instances where somebody paused and said, I'm concerned, I'm worried, and they're able to jump in prior to what could have been a very catastrophe in regards to a patient safety event. And so recognizing our caregivers and being able to say and celebrate, you did a great job, is one of the goals of the Good Catch Award, and one of the most favorite ones that I like to achieve on. All right. So we're going to go through this slide, and this is kind of a combo. Did you want to begin?
I am going to say we did see the sign that we have 10 minutes left, and
Oh,
so we'll
10.
hit the high notes.
Okay, let's do it.
So we'll do a combo.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've noticed, so it's been so nice to tour all the campuses, and I'm really impressed with Swedish and the daily management system. And when they were launching Swedish management system, they reached out to a variety of organizations, including us. And it was really, it's neat for me to see how it culminated. And you can see, in essence, daily management systems are pretty consistent. Now, how you do it, you saw creativity, which is so great. But whether it's the visual management, which Renee just talked about, daily huddles, that communication up and down is so critical. We'll show you a picture of that. So those 2 different huddles, the ability to learn and to bring ideas that come from the front lines and are voted on from the front lines. She showed you the picture of that. Focusing on what's important. We have 9 million different metrics. We really need to pick the vital few and fix those, but sustaining is hard. And it's not just hard at Swedish, it's hard throughout healthcare. Aligning and developing standard work are important. And we may call them different things, but in essence, those fundamentals are very similar between no matter where you go around daily management. And again, we know we're between you and lunch, so we'll just hit the high notes. So just to let you, so if we look at daily management, which is really where the SMS boards are, it's sort of the left-hand slide or part of the slide, and it's really at the department or unit level. It's really, and as I say, it's like cleaning your own house, and it's important to clean your own house, like on the left, before you clean up the neighborhood, and that's the right. And up north at Everett, they started with things called value stream teams, and they're shared multidisciplinary permanent management teams. So think perioperative services, think critical care, think emergency department. And they bring folks from all of those different departments on that left-hand side together in a shared team. And that's how you focus on the systems. So it's a way how you can link the greatness of the DMS boards with sort of a shared vision. And I would say for the Everett side, we focused on VSM first and then realized, boy, we needed to get daily management in place. So I think y'all did it in the cadence that that works a lot better. And so what that looks like, so it is those permanent multidisciplinary teams, and you can kind of see in the green what their responsibilities are. Values measured from the patient perspective. I'll show you how you start on that. And then you align across the metrics top and down. So I'll show you something that we use called a metrics cascade that I think is actually also used on the daily management. It's a way to make sure the frontline focus is aligned with the top areas that are so important. So this is an example where all the teams start. You get everybody right from that sort of those functional DMS departments together, and you, in essence, start from the eye of the patient and how they flow through your stream of services, right? And where do they find value, and where are their pain points? And those big kind of yellow BAM signs, like from the comic books, those are those big areas of pain points for the patients and their families, and that's where you focus. So it's really critical to start from that patient, and then that drives who should be on your team, what do you focus on? And oftentimes it's at those linkages between departments or between different areas. And there's wise words at the bottom. If you can't describe what you are doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. And it was fascinating within 5 minutes of these value stream teams getting together, I didn't know we did it like that. Do we do it like that? So it's so important to get them all together. This is just an example of the importance of communication top-down and executive leadership support. This is just an example of how those value stream teams report weekly to the executive team. They've got a whole time with them. Sometimes they're weekly, sometimes bi-weekly or monthly, based on how mature they are, but really giving those teams time in front of the executive leadership and the support of leadership in what they're doing. This is the metrics cascade. In essence, think about the example of CODI, right? So if you think of CODI going all the way down saying, we want to reduce CODIs. So what does that look like? That is bundle compliance. Maybe that's at X% of a goal. Okay, level down from there. What are the components within the bundle compliance that we want to focus on? So it's cascading down the metrics and the data that matters to the teams, so everybody's in alignment to where they need to go. So that's that metrics cascade. I use it all the time actually in strategy, and I've noticed actually on some of the DMS, or actually many of the DMS boards, in essence that same thing. What's the big dot that's important for the organization? How do we factor into that? And the right hand side is just an example of a couple of the daily management system boards up in Everett. They were framed by high reliability, but in essence the same components. And then this is our schematic. I like vises like Renee does. But as we look at those tier huddles, communication up and down. Left-hand side is the Swedish tiers, and whether they're daily from unit to the campus to the Swedish system, what that looks like. And that huddle communication and infrastructure is important for daily management, and it's also important for value streams. So they all work synergistically together, but you've got to have that part of it. There we go. Oops, sorry, I didn't realize the animation. So final thoughts. I'm going to turn it back over to Mike.
So I'll be brief. Quality improvement is everyone's job, and I know we tote that a lot. It really happens on all levels of the work that we do, and it really is truly personal accountability, but also an organizational responsibility. Culture of safety is critical. It's critical for improvement. If we don't have a process and ability to speak transparently, speak up for safety, then we won't know and identify the issues at hand. Frontline caregiver involvement is key. And if we can do anything more currently and in the future, is being able to get shared leadership and the voice and be able to utilize our SMS boards more routinely to be able to get the voice of those caregivers to the table. And don't forget to celebrate success. It's so important to see the wins. We often focus on the issues and the problems, and we don't take enough time to celebrate when we do win those measurables. And never underestimate the power of teams. The interdisciplinary team, the voice of every single person, is such a key part of this process because we're humans and we're part of a human entity here. So, so again, that's really important. So with that, I'll hand it off to Amir
That for those of you that aren't aware, this was an expert master class in safety, quality, and change management in a very brief time. I mean, this is really pretty amazing from these two leaders, and I think you should really appreciate their work. Thank you very much. There are some questions in the chat that I'm going to pose to the two of you. You guys can decide who's going to answer them. The first question is, do we have a patient experience quality goals? And is this the same as patient safety goals?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I'll keep my mask on, but let me know if you can't hear me. Yes, we are getting, we have patient experience goals. Traditionally, they've been a hard target. What is the percentage of patients that said you were the top for, name your question, communication, following up, working as a team? What we've done in this region, and actually at the leadership of Swedish, was change that to say, what's the percentile ranking we want? When we compare to others in our peer group, we want to be top. What does that look like? So those are those goals that we have around patient experience. And again, that's really around the patient's experience while they're here. Patient safety is different. Patient safety is, and thank you for asking that question. I greatly appreciate it. A lot of patient safety goals are really around, it's either the events that we see, so CODIs, collapses, falls, pressure injuries, which we've heard this morning. So they're around our outcomes. Oftentimes those patient safety ones are around that. But there's also some process ones about how quickly do we look at these safety events? How quickly do we resolve them? How quickly do we do our root cause analysis to determine the causes? So a little bit of mix. I don't know if you have that. No, but okay.
Next question is, one issue has been not including the evaluation step after the PDSA. What is the plan to include evaluation step to reflect on what has worked, not worked, barriers after PDSA?
Yeah. We need to do that better, not just period. The evaluation piece, often when we're working on projects and we do a PDSA, we're on to the next project right after employing it. And so what's key is actually building those metrics and building it into a system where it's forcing us to come back to ensure. And so that involves tracking. It also includes building in structures where we're purposely putting time on a calendar 3 months from now to revisit and to look at the metrics. It also involves us on what are we evaluating, being very clear what we're measuring, because sometimes we have a project in mind, we have a root cause, we have deliverables, but we don't know what we're measuring to make sure we're making a difference. So having that embedded. So it's just getting, I would say, more consistent and being able to ensure that we're measuring the appropriate things, that we're holding ourselves accountable by actually tracking the work that we're doing. And we have DMV at Cherry Hill right now, and that was one of the pieces that they spoke to us about, is how do we know that when we employ something, that we're coming back 3 months, 6 months later, and having that follow-up and having accountability to do that. So we're looking at structures, minutes, and trackers, and stoplight reports to help us do that.
Yeah. I have one more thing. I think what Renee just said is so critical. We know that sustaining is hard, regardless of where you're at. And we know that drift happens, right? So ways to recognize it, we have to recognize it, right? And then how do you build the systems and structures to make sure that evaluation is embedded within it? It's one of those slices of Swiss cheese, if you will. We know it's going to happen, so we can do better on the systems and structures around it.
Thank you. The next question is how to tackle new digital difficulties that lead to patient safety issues. Processes take so long to solve virtually.
Here, I'll start. So I think there's a couple things. Number one is digitally, how do you, so EQVR system, use that system, right? So move that up. But I think the question may be kind of two ways. From the digital ways and all the technology, how do you identify that? Number one is really reporting it. If we can't fix it if we don't report it. Now, figuring out the right people to get in the room to be able to fix it, that may take longer. And for folks who are here with the nutrition presentation, I think that was a perfect example. If we've identified something that we've done based on some digital implementation that we've had, identify it and then we can work through the channels to try to get that navigated. But sometimes it's a little more complex. But number one is absolutely reporting it. The second one I'm going to speak to is actually on the value stream teams. Renee gave great visits around the daily management system boards. They're physically located on the units. But when we went to value stream up in the north, we actually went to virtual huddles. So we use Teams. So there's ways to use technology, and that's often a really good time to be able to talk about the technical challenges, because we can ping in information services and system folks who maybe are on the technical side to be able to help us figure out our problems. So you use technology, bring in technology to be able to make the systems better.
Another thing I would add to that is use tiered huddles. So you're submitting your EQVRs, you're submitting your tickets, but being able to then work with your core leader to escalate it on tier 3, tier 4. We've got the stakeholders from the system and from the region on those calls so that if we need to escalate a technology concern. What I'm hearing also in that comment is I think of Epic and I think of things so that it takes a long time for us to change or augment. And so with that, it's being able to escalate it through a louder voice at the enterprise level to be able to make those technology changes and improvements. And one of the advantages of being part of a larger region now within Western Washington as Puget Sound region is that we're going to have a much louder voice at the table to help make those changes. And if I've learned anything with the technology issues is being able to collectively communicate with other regions to understand if they're having similar challenges so that we can resurface that more quickly.
Next question. I know we're running a little bit late. This is really important, and I don't think we should shortchange the quality work that's been done so far. Next question. Speaking up takes practice. It can be uncomfortable to speak up if you have not done so before. When we all practice this behavior together, expect it of each other, and celebrate and show gratitude when people do speak up. It becomes more comfortable to do so. Each time you do this, you are contributing to building psychological safety and positive culture change. I don't think there's a question there, but
yes.
we would agree.
Yes. Do you want to speak to just an example of the fireside that y'all did about how we Swedish culture around safety? It's such a that is an excellent observation, and I think you can see how you put it in practice.
Well, our fireside chat, which if you missed it, we did record it, and it's through our newsletter, was talking about the Redonda bot case and being able to speak up and have psychological safety. And it doesn't, I'm not here to say that we have complete psychological safety at Swedish. I know that there's many areas where folks still do not feel comfortable speaking up for safety. And so those are the areas that we're really targeting and focused on. But having and building that safety culture, speak up for safety, our patient safety officers and team members and leaders have done a tremendous job in really promoting that. And that example of just being able to take the moment, be uncomfortable, talk when your voice is shaking. I love that quote. Because we've all had to do it, where it's unpopular or it might be uncomfortable, and all you need is that one other person to say, thank you for saying that. Even if you disagree, be able to say and be committed to hearing folks out is going to be so important. So the fireside chat with Redonda is just one example. When people are saying, I'm feeling uncomfortable and I don't know how to speak about it, being able to have those forums and venues by which we can discuss it, to at least not only acknowledge, but problem solve and be proactive about our approach.
I have one last question, and it has to do with the Redonda bot case, because it is current, but it is also feels to me like all of the work that you presented here, having a bucket of water thrown at it, right? It is intended to dilute that, to squash what requires people to speak up. And I'd like to hear each of you kind of, your view of the future and how we overcome that situation for us here.
For me, it's intentionality. We have to be very intentional that we're keeping systems in place where our caregivers and our patients are at the heart and the center of the work that we do. And with the Redonda VOD case, and if you go through the timeline, things broke down on many system levels. Prior to the event with the system, during the investigation, how it was reported, how just the whole. There were so many gaps where folks went astray that could have been done quite differently. So I would say intentionality and vigilance and making sure that we are consistent in our process. That when we do our debriefs, when we do our disclosures to families, when we have these conversations, when we have caregivers who are brought up, for court cases, that we do have liability coverage, that we do go to bat. I've done in my career 4 or 5 depositions on behalf of caregivers representing Swedish as an organization, and ensuring that folks know that as long as when we look at it, if we look at it from a moral, ethical perspective, we look at intentionality of the person who made the error. If it was not intended and we're able to understand the system issues with it, then we have no challenge in being able to defend that and supporting caregivers through that process. It's more an issue, and criminality comes into place if it was intentional. Someone is trying to do harm to a patient, then of course that takes a whole other pathway. So what I would say for us, it's a lot of attention to how we do this, being able to share that with our caregivers so we don't have the backlash, the consequence of not speaking up, because as you said, a whole bucket of water was thrown on our work if folks then say, I don't want to speak up because I'm afraid that I will be criminalized for a mistake that I made. And that's a failure to healthcare, it's a failure to our organization and to our profession. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I would say from a nationwide perspective, everyone sort of did a collective ugh when this came out, right? It's not just us, and it's not just in healthcare. And it's exactly what Dr. Pastaros had said. This is everything that high reliability is not, right? And so for me, my answer would be show we mean it, right? And what that means is show we mean that high reliability and the culture of safety is important to us. And that means on the unit, it means at the executive leadership team on the campus, it means at Swedish, and it means all the way up to the Puget Sound region. We need to show everybody and tell everybody and continually communicate that that's not this place. And that is important, and it has to start from the top. I would say secondly, from ours, where we from the top all the way down, Renee mentioned it is a phrase I use all the time, and just remember this. For patient safety, and when we look at the culture of safety, it is starting with positive intent. And we start with, in all of our investigations, our systems and our structures, why would a competent, well-intentioned person do what they did at the time that they did it? And we start looking at the system structures. And again, that's still holding people accountable if there's mistakes, but it's not in that punitive, solely down that way. It is looking, how did the systems and structures fail this person? That's where we start. And each one of us has to start there. But no, that's a commitment all the way from the top. But we got to show it, and we know it.
And isn't that a wonderful way to live your life as well? Assume positive intent. Are there more questions from the audience? I don't see any more in the chat. If there aren't, I want to thank you both for being such great leaders and giving us this this learning opportunity and really bookending much of the work that we're doing in quality and in scholarly work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.